Good evening, everyone. A quorum of the school committee being present, I call tonight's meeting to order. What did I say? A school committee. Oh, there you go. I got the budget on my mind. I call tonight's meeting of the City Council to order. If please rise, if willing and able, to salute the flag and pause for a moment of silence. If we could, just want to say one thing about the moment of silence. John McCusker was a lifelong Cambridge resident who struggled with homelessness for about the past 2 decades. And he struggled with alcohol and some other substances as well. I saw him Thursday morning. He was in recovery and said that he had a slight relapse and was waiting for a bed to enter a 14-day program. But unfortunately, that bed didn't come soon enough because he died Thursday night. And just an example of why we need to make sure that we're doing more for people who are struggling with substance abuse. He was a very, very good man that had some bad luck. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Tonight's meeting is being recorded with audio and visual devices. There are hearing aids available if anyone needs them. On a motion by Vice Mayor Devereaux to accept the minutes of the regular City Council meeting of February 25th, 2019, March 4th, 2019, and the roundtable working meeting of March 13th, 2019. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the minutes are accepted. We now move to public comment. Public comment is the time in the meeting when the public is allowed to speak for up to 3 minutes on any issue on tonight's agenda, with the exception of communications and awaiting reports. To your left, you will see a screen that will count down your 3 minutes. At 15 seconds, you will hear a beep, and then that's your indication to start wrapping up, and then you'll hear another tone at the end of your time. We ask that all comments be directed to the chair and not to individual councilors. If you have written comments, there's a basket on the table next to the podium. We ask that you please leave your written comments there. Makes it easier for our clerk. If your comments are electronic, there's also business cards there. If you email them to the clerk before midnight tonight, they will be included in the minutes of tonight's meeting. We ask folks to please, in the audience, to please refrain from clapping, snapping, booing, or anything that might intimidate a person from speaking who may hold a different opinion than the majority of folks in the room. We want this to be an open and welcoming place for everyone. With that, we will go to the first speaker, Francis Goyes Flor. No? All right, we'll skip. Stephen Kaiser, followed by Trudy Goodman. Good evening.
Make sure this is on. Yes, it is. Thank you. On Council Order number 12, I noticed that the order includes in the whereas the City Council adopted goals. And I'd like to connect 3 of them to the issues raised in this order. One is to expand and deepen community engagement. The second is to develop more proactive, inclusive, and transparent city planning process. Both of those I agree with totally, and find that the Envision process was deficit in that regard. It was not transparent. There was no final report available, no zoning language. So I think if we meet this goal this year, we will improve on the Envision process. The third one, I'm not quite sure what the intent was originally or here, but it's increase access to affordable housing for all income groups. Why should that be a priority for the rich folks and for the fat cats? The priority should be for those who don't have affordable housing and need help from the city to get it. So there's something wrong with that goal. When we get to the final order, I'd suggest we combine 2 of these. One is affordable housing construction, and the other is Central Square revitalization. And I offer that because Central Square has many vacant parking lots that were bought by the city 50 years ago. And they're really an absurd city form. And it's city land. It could be achieved and acquired very easily, and we could build housing on it. There used to be housing on them. And another possibility is look at retail vacancies. We have a proposal before the council right now for a zoning change at the East Cambridge Mall. And retail is on the downs, and they're starting to put housing in there, which is a very good proposal. So we should be looking around for empty vacant spaces where housing could be built. For a citywide housing program, I would advocate that we do what the East Cambridge planning team recommended, is start all over. Work up a credible and practical and financially feasible housing program for the whole city, and use this pilot program at Central Square as a basis for finding out how subsidy programs can work effectively for the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Trudy? And I neglected to say, when you come up to the mic, please state your name, your address, and the issue that you're speaking on tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Trudy Goodman. I live at 1221 Cambridge Street, the Inman Square Apartments in Inman Square. I came wanting to speak to Policy Order 11, but I think it's, no pun intended, inclusive of some other issues that might be going on as well here with that. The Boston Pilot Program is a very good program. I work with the homeless in Boston. I go into shelters where we teach people mindfulness and play music. It's a group called Tune Foolery. We've been doing it for about 25 years now. And if we're going to talk affordable housing, we have to talk it across the board. And I'm not going to make the assumption, as previous gentlemen, that somebody who might seem to have a lot in their bank account might not need help with housing. However, I need help with housing first. Okay, I'll be really honest with you about that. The other thing is, and I really keep wanting to speak to this because it's very important, when we talk affordable housing and we talk inclusion and we talk across the board of what people need, they don't just need housing, they need the other end of it. It isn't enough for it to be affordable, it needs to be safe, it needs to be managed well, it needs to be built well. In my own experience right now, I'm living in affordable housing, and again, there were problems with the landlord over the weekend with faulty fire alarms, and the maintenance people never showed up, and our very wonderful fire department came and helped me. That's not really their job at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's HRI's job, who owns my building. So I would say when we do speak about affordable housing, which is a necessity, and the inclusion of all people, and clearly I'm articulate, but there are lots of people who are disabled, lots of people who don't feel like they can come into this room and talk about these issues. We need to talk about the other end of it. Build it well, maintain it well, make sure the people developing it care about their tenants. It's incredibly important. It's probably the most important thing on the other end of this besides affordable housing. And I'll just say one more thing. There's a gentleman who tried to jump off the roof an hour ago at Essex and Massachusetts Avenue. I spoke to several homeless people in the crowd, some of whom knew him, and it was that he was feeling very desperate. I never want to see anybody feel so desperate that they try and take a permanent solution to a temporary problem, and affordable housing should be a temporary problem here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trudy. Javon Sobrino Wheeler, followed by Patrick Barrett.
My name is Jeevan Sobrino Wheeler. I'm a resident of Cambridge at 19 Trowbridge Street, and I'm here to ask the City Council to support Policy Order number 110 to double the annual funding for affordable housing. I was reading an article today about the booming economy in Kendall Square, and one real estate company in particular, Alexandria. According to the co-founder of Alexandria, who's quoted in the article, "We started just with hope that our $19 million that we raised from friends and family would someday maybe create a little company that could own a few buildings. We never quite imagined what it is today. Today, Alexandria is worth $13 billion. In reading the article, I couldn't help but think, I wish the rest of us had friends and family who could have lent us $19 million. Then maybe we could have benefited from speculating on Cambridge's property market. Instead, most Canterburyans, 2/3 of whom are tenants like me, have mostly gotten one thing: higher rents. The upside of Cambridge's booming economy and property values is that the city has generated a lot of tax income from real estate companies like Alexandria. The city now has very strong finances and a large amount of flexible funding that the city can choose to spend now or wait for a rainy day. Given all the uncertainty in our country today, I can see how it would be tempting to think that the request to double annual funding to construct affordable housing, preserve our tree canopy, and increase preschool enrollment might seem controversial. I can also imagine how it might seem wise to save more for a rainy day, especially if I was a government official close to the power, but not that close to the pain, to paraphrase our Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. As a Cambridge resident and tenant, I'm here tonight to make sure that the city realizes today is that rainy day. When the typical one-bedroom apartment in Cambridge rents for $2,000 a month, and most tenants are spending more than 50% of their income on rent, it is pouring. When thousands of our residents have been displaced because they couldn't afford to live in Cambridge, like Carol Perot, who spoke at a city council meeting not long ago, it is pouring. And for the tenants I organize with whose apartments are flooding and whose landlords are unresponsive because they know they can easily find another renter, this isn't even a metaphor, it is literally pouring. Doubling the amount of funding for affordable housing also shouldn't be seen as charity. We know that when we increase funding for affordable housing and trees and preschool, the cost of city support services goes down, and people are more productive when they don't have to worry about their basic needs. Not only is this just the right thing to do, it's a good investment. But while the fiscal argument for increasing affordable housing also seems pretty obvious to me, I think the strongest argument for it is the moral one if we care about our neighbors, many of whom are struggling more than me and can't make it to public comment this evening. When it comes to housing in Cambridge, it's a very rainy day, and Canterburyans, especially the 2/3 of whom are tenants like me, are being soaked. Thank you. I'll email my comments to the clerk.
Thank you. Patrick Barrett, followed by Heather Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm Patrick Barrett. Been told I'm having a bad hair day, so I'm here to talk about the policy order regarding funding, increased funding for affordable housing, the tree canopy, preschool enrollment, and the Central Square revitalization and cultural and arts district. I've heard already one person talk about it, this particular policy order. They didn't mention Central Square at all, or the cultural arts district. And I'm hoping that as you guys secure funding, that doesn't get lost in the shuffle. The cultural district has been in place for over 7 years. We've received no funding whatsoever. It's important, and we need to fund it. I'm not against preschool enrollment scholarships in space. I think that's a fine thing. I have children. I pay a lot of money for daycare. I wish I didn't have to. Affordable housing is like the only thing that this legislative body really gets into. I would love to see a council that talks about, except for leaf blowers and trees, into other things. Affordable housing is important, but it's not the only thing that's going on in the city. Central Square is very important, and it gets a lot of talk, but not a lot of action. So thank you for putting this in there. Councilors Carlone, Zondervan, McGovern, Councilor Siddiqui, and Councilor Mallon. And I hope that you guys make sure that that funding actually goes to Central Square. Thank you.
Thank you. Heather Hoffman, followed by Nancy Ryan.
Someone's. Heather Hoffman, 213 Hurley Street. I think this is a red letter day. I agree with everybody who preceded me. And in general, with possibly difference in emphasis, I would adopt their comments as my own, which will probably save some time. I wanted to speak first about the city manager's request for $250,000 for radios. And not that I have any problem with having public safety people be able to communicate with each other. It's really a question about what's going on here. $150,000 was appropriated to move the antennas off of the Big Ugly Courthouse last year, and apparently they weren't moved. And so they stopped working when the basement flooded, and we got to listen to a god-awful generator for weeks. So I'm just curious about what all's going on, and I hope that the council will make sure that there is not only a reasonable plan for making sure that communication that needs to happen will happen, but that the work that is authorized actually happens. And then just a couple of platitudes about arts. I have a kid who's about to graduate from Mass Art who will not be living in Cambridge because that's just not a possibility. And I think that the city of Cambridge is much poorer for losing its artists. Artists are the people who paved the way for all of the other good stuff. Look around at all the places that become trendy. Before that, they were funky and full of artists. And so the artists get to move on, having made a nice place for rich people. And then finally, affordable housing. I think that we should make sure that all of the people all of the income levels who can't really find affordable housing in this city are able to. People have said before, and it's absolutely true, that it is not possible for us to build housing for everybody who wants to live here. That is life, and we're not going to change that. And the only way to change that is to turn this into a place that none of us would want to live in. But that doesn't mean that we should not build for people in the middle. Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy Ryan?
Good evening. I live at... Time to get up. I live at 4 Ashburton Place. This is pretty short. I want to thank the mayor and councilors Carlone, Siddiqui, and Zondervan for bringing policy order number 12 forward. As we all look to the near future, it's important to have funding commitments that align with the council's goals and give us residents an indication of the city managers and the council's sense of priorities for new public resources in the next 3 to 5 years. I'm speaking for the Cambridge Residents Alliance. We have been advocating recently for an addition of $20 million to the 2020 budget for affordable housing. We believe that this is a critical moment in which to put some substantial local tax dollars to work for additional affordable housing now. We also applaud the managers and the council's commitment to study the diversity preservation program that the city of Boston has piloted, giving neighborhood preference to residents losing their homes where they have roots. We should do whatever we can to maintain the cohesive ties that residents have to their neighbors and familiar places that nurture healthy lives and communities. There's a hunger in Cambridge for resources, programs, and policies, I think that was pretty evident last week, that make action possible in the short run, as well as solid planning for the future. We should be able to make both things happen. So I urge you to add $20 million to the 2020 budget for affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Did Francis come in? No? Is there anyone who has not signed in who would like to speak on an issue in tonight's agenda? Peter?
I want to speak on a very important thing, which is always on our agenda, which is it's okay to be a human being. If we don't take that seriously, then the people who create machines will want to create machines to replace human beings, okay? And then that'll happen. But the thing is, since I believe that the creator of all existence wants to remember everything, okay, then human beings are going to be born again. So what do? We struggle to make our human life interesting.
Thank you, Peter. Sue Butler, followed by Charles Franklin, followed by James Williamson.
I'd like to support Nancy Ryan's comments on affordable housing and It's been a complex and intense process, and I really respect and thank the City Council for the thoroughness with which you've really attended to affordable housing in our city, which is quite an accomplishment. Thank you. Thank you for governing.
Thank you, Sue. Sue, are you 16, Chilton? Clinton? 14. All right, that was in the ballpark. A lot of people get up here. Charles?
Good afternoon, everyone. Charles Franklin, 162 Hampshire Street. All right. First, I would like to thank the council and the manager for pushing for more money for these things, for affordable housing and trees and such. But I also feel the need to say that $30 million annually is a pittance for the things that we need to accomplish, those 4 or 5 things on that list. We have a housing crisis, an environmental crisis, a number of other things. We need to do some crisis spending. We need to take $100 million now from free cash or wherever else. Just take our free cash, half of it, and course correct. Build some housing here, plant some trees there. Don't have to do this every year, but we have to take at least one dramatic action now. Thank you.
James?
Thank you. James Williamson, 1000 Jackson Place. There's a number of items that have to do with bicycling and pedestrian and bicycle safety that I would like to speak to. One of which is, I believe it's okay to speak to something that was charter rated last week. The survey, the city survey. I think as I looked through it, had a chance to look through it after last week's meeting, and there were a couple of things that stood out for me. One is under the what is your primary method of getting around Cambridge? 9% in this telephone survey of 400 people, including cell phones. 9%, I think the city modal split was 7%. 9% say that their primary method of getting around Cambridge is on a bicycle. 23% say that it's public transportation. And then the other thing that sort of jumped out at me is under the question, I would like to see the city install more protected bike lanes in Cambridge. A pretty noticeable, higher than in the rest of the questions, number 22% were in total disagreement with that. Now that's striking to me because I tend to think a protected bike lane makes sense where it's feasible, where it makes sense, and is probably safer. But that to me shows that there's some people who are pretty upset about the way this is being done. And unfortunately, the way the question is framed, there isn't an option where you could say, yes, I am for protected bike lanes, but it depends on how they're implemented. And I think that kind of thoughtfulness is missing from the survey, and I think that's the kind of thoughtfulness that we need and that I think is missing in this ordinance that's before you, that there was a hearing about it, and maybe you're poised to vote on that sometime soon. So that's, and there is this item in the manager's agenda about the Brattle Street signage. It's not like we could ever do anything. It's really crazy if you're trying to cross Brattle Street and you look this way to see whether, look that way if if cars are coming, then you look that way to see if bicyclists are coming, then you look that way to see if bicycles are coming, and then you're lucky if you make it across the street. So signage, I don't think, is necessarily the only way to address the concerns of the public, and to start beforehand to make it better. And so that gets to the this cycling ordinance. On my way here, in front of the Graduate School of Design, green light, cross signal. I'm walking across Cambridge Street by the fire station. A young woman on a bicycle zipped in front of me, zips around the corner, and nearly runs over people in the crosswalk around the corner. This happens every day. That has to be part of our thinking about bicycle safety. And it's not just about pedestrians, it's also going to keep bicyclists safer. So let's have the public involved before we implement this plan so that we can do it carefully and avoid the irritation that everybody is so familiar with in the recent
Thank you, James.
Implementations. Thank you.
Thank you, James. The gentleman in the back, you had your hand up? Please come on up, state your name, your address, and the issue you're speaking on, please.
Hello, I'm Brad Bowman. I live at 260 Harvard Street. I'm hoping to speak on policy order number 12. I wanted to echo calls to dramatically increase the annual funding for affordable housing in Cambridge. I think Nancy Ryan and Jeevan Sabrina Wheeler put many of my points better than I could, but I'd like to add that as a multi-year tenant in Cambridge, who also represents an increasingly rare creature, the graduate student capable of affording rent here, this issue hits home for me and many others who I interact with on a daily basis. So to follow on a previous speaker, I think that we risk losing not only our artists, but some of the very viable academic community that calls this place home as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Hassan Rashid?
Hello. Peace be unto you. Hello, everybody. I'm Hassan Rashid. I reside at 820 Massachusetts Avenue. My public comment this evening is concerning agenda item, policy order, resolution list number 6, 11, 12. And any other agenda item that relates directly or indirectly to homelessness. The idea for 100% affordable housing zoning overlay or the ongoing discussion of it must not result in zoning out the homeless sector in Mosaic. Local zoning must be used to promote the general welfare of its homeless citizens, and that is by providing adequate housing opportunities for all categories of people. A 100% affordable housing zoning overlay will limit housing opportunities for local homeless citizens. Discussion thus far of this idea has not adequately included enough specifically concerning the inclusion of homeless citizens in regards to affordable housing construction and development. There is no blueprint for homeless housing or concrete homeless strategies for the homeless within it. When we discuss affordable housing issues, the homeless citizen should be equally included in the comprehensive planning equations. If the planning doesn't cover construction and development adequately from the ground up, then it must be heading in the direction of exclusionary zoning. I highly doubt it if this proposed affordable housing zoning overlay will provide every local homeless citizen or family with a unit of permanent housing, etc. This then proposed affordable housing zoning overlay will provide little to no opportunity for local homeless citizens. It then will become a barrier to housing for the homeless. It will become an impediment to homeless citizens securing permanent shelter. In conclusion, the proposed affordable housing zoning overlay will function and serve as exclusionary zoning, be racially discriminatory as well as economically discriminatory. It will aid in the circumvention of the need for immediate solutions for the local social problems of homelessness in Cambridge, Massachusetts, a housing problem thus created by exclusionary zoning. Thank you.
Thank you. Francis, last call. On a motion by Vice Mayor Devereaux to close public comment, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and public comment is closed. We now move to reconsiderations. There are none. We now move to the city manager's agenda on a motion by Councilor Simmons to bring the city manager's agenda before us for discussion and adoption. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. I'm also going to move suspension to bring forward charter right items 1 through 6, which were part of the city manager's agenda item for the last meeting. On suspension, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. I'm bringing forward charter right 1 through 6. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Pleasure of the council. Councilor Carlo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On the charter right list, I'd like to bring forth number 1 and comment on number 6, which is being replaced by a new order.
Okay, 1 and 6. Vice Mayor.
I'd like to bring forth from the charter rights number 4, please.
Okay. Councilor Zondervan.
City Manager Agenda Items 7 and 11. And charter right number 2, please.
Mr. Chair?
I got Councilor Kelly and then Councilor Mallon. Councilor Kelly.
Number 5 on the charter right, please. And then on this week's number 8, please.
Counselor Mallon?
Number 4 and 5, please.
Four and five. Pleasure of the council. Roll call on the balance.
On the consent agenda items, Councilor Calhoun.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Yes.
Councilor Kelly. Councilor Mallon.
Yes.
Councilor Siddiqui.
Yes.
Councilor Simmons. Councilor Toomey. Councilor Zondervan.
Yes.
Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
And the consent agenda items are adopted on the affirmative vote with 9 in favor.
Okay, so for everybody's sanity, I'm not going to flip all over the place. I'm just going to go through these in order, so the charter right items will be last. We now move to City Manager Agenda Item Number 4, transmitting communication from Louis A. DePasquale, City Manager, relative to the appropriation of $560,000 from free cash to the Public Investment Fund Fire Extraordinary Expenditures account, which will fund the refurbishing of a 2002 Pierce rear mount aerial ladder truck. Councilor Mallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the City Manager and Chief Mahoney. This is a fire truck that was replaced at headquarters. There's a new fire truck, a new aerial ladder fire truck. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So in November, we put in service a brand new aerial ladder at Ladder 1 in Harvard Square at Fire Headquarters. And the plan was for the vehicle that replaced will go to Ladder 4 up at Taylor Square. And for the Ladder 4 aerial, which is a 2002 aerial, we will send that back to the manufacturer for a total manufacturer's refurbishment, and by doing that we will get 10 to 15 years of service out of it as a reserve aerial ladder. Our current reserve truck is a 1994, and once we get the 2002 truck back, the 1994 vehicle can be sold on the secondary market.
And how long does it take to refurbish?
That's probably going to be about a 6-month. The terminology they use is they use the term, they take it right down at the rails. They basically take the body off the truck, they take the aerial off the truck, go all over everything, rehab it, repair it, rebuild certain components, test it, and be very, very, as I say, we'll get 10 to 15 years of service to the city as a reserve aerial at that time.
Thank you. And one more question. What's my other question? Oh, how much is it, if we were to buy a new one, like how much did the new one cost? $560,000 to refurbish a fire truck seems like a lot of money. I know that generally they cost around $500,000 for a brand new one, so I'm just curious.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, the ladder truck that went in service in November cost about $1.3 million. And I think something to keep in mind with respect to the reserve ladder truck is history has shown us that would go in service 5 or 6 times a year while another vehicle is out for maintenance or may have had an accident or something like that, and would be in service anywhere from about 5 days to a month at the most. So I actually use the term that it's really an investment, and it's very important as part of our ISO Class 1 rating to have apparatus that's reserve apparatus with respect to the ISO Fire Protection Rating Schedule is apparatus that is basically ready to go in service, doesn't need to have a lot of things done to it. So when we change over to reserve apparatus, it takes us about 1 to 2 hours to do it just by moving some equipment from one piece to another.
Okay, thank you.
Pleasure. Councilor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is too convenient of an opportunity not to ask about the jumper and the fire department's response in Central Square as just one of those things I wouldn't expect the fire department to have to handle, but you did.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't have a tremendous amount of information on the incident, but I can tell you there was a very successful resolution to it, and nobody was injured, and one of our firefighters assigned to the rescue company made a very successful grab and prevented something very unfortunate from happening.
Thank you. On the order, roll call.
On agenda item number 3, Council Calhoun.
Yes. Number 4.
Sorry. Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Yes.
Council Kelly. Council Mallon.
Yes.
Council Siddiqui.
Yes.
Council Simmons.
Yes.
Council Toomey. Council Zondervan.
Yes.
Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
And agenda item number 4 is adopted on the affirmative vote with 9 in favor.
We now go to City Manager Agenda Item Number 5, transmitting communication from Louis A. DePasquale, City Manager, relative to the appropriation of $593,000 from free cash to the Public Investment Fund Fire Extraordinary Expenditures Account, which will fund the replacement of a 2007 Pierce Pumper fire truck, pulled by Councilor Mallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the Chief. I know we've been talking a lot about Vision Zero here in the chamber and the responsibility of trucks on the road as pertains to pedestrians and cyclist fatalities. And one of the things that any municipality can do is to purchase smaller fire vehicles. I'm just wondering, I know that as part of this order, this is going to be a little bit smaller than a typical pumper truck. I'm just wondering if you could tell us how much smaller.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So one of the things with respect to the design of fire apparatus, we have to follow National Fire Protection Association standards. They're obviously not laws or regulations, but you run a serious liability risk if you don't adhere to those standards when specifying and purchasing equipment, and manufacturers will not make apparatus that doesn't conform to those standards. That being said, the pumper that is currently online at PS Apparatus in Wisconsin, which we'll take delivery of probably the end of April, a pumper that was funds were appropriated by this body a year ago, is about 4,000 pounds lighter than the typical pumpers that we have. It has much better ergonomically designed with respect to the firefighters that will be working off this piece of apparatus, with respect to the ability to retrieve equipment, pack equipment, so forth and so on. It'll have a better ability with respect to navigation around, a densely built-up area. The width of a traditional fire pump, they're all basically the same. They run 96 to 98 inches wide. There's not much we can do about that. Wheelbase, I believe, is a little shorter. The overall length is a little shorter. But the key factors with this particular pumper is the design that we went with is going to make it a lot more user-friendly, if you will. For example, the bottom of the hose bed on this new pumper is less than 5 feet off the ground, as opposed to the previous pumpers we purchased. The bottom of the hose bed was over 6 feet off the ground. So.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I'm pleased that we're putting a lot of investment into our fire apparatus and our fire vehicles. What is the life expectancy of this particular truck?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Basically, when you purchase a new piece of fire apparatus, you expect to get, the standard. NFPA recommends 15 years if it's well maintained. It should then be placed in reserve status, and that's about what we tend to get out of them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Vice Mayor?
Thank you. I don't know if this was the size of the truck that had difficulty today getting into the building on Sherman Street that's adjacent to where the new crossing is. Apparently there was a call, and I'm wondering do we have smaller, more nimble trucks that can make that turn? I don't know the relative sizes of the trucks.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm not quite certain what apparatus response, whether it was an engine company or the ladder company.
I think it was L4.
Okay, so ladder 4. So ladder truck is a lot longer than a pumper.
Okay.
I can look into the incident to find out what they experienced on the response, and report back to you, but.
Okay, because I know it's not directly related to this, but we need to make sure that we have the right size equipment responding to calls there. And today,
Right, I agree.
it didn't work today. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. On the order, roll call.
On agenda item number 5, Counsel Carlone.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Yes.
Counsel Kelly. Counsel Mallon.
Yes.
Counsel Siddiqui.
Yes.
Counsel Simmons.
Yes.
Counsel Toomey. Counsel Zondervan.
Yes.
Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
And agenda item number 5 is adopted on the affirmative vote with 9 in favor.
We now move to City Manager Agenda Item Number 7, transmitting communication from Louis A. DePasquale, City Manager, relative to the appropriation of $250,000 from free cash to the Public Investment Fund Emergency Communication Extraordinary Expenditure Account, which will fund a new radio site for the conventional radio system in the eastern portion of the city. This was pulled by Councilor Zondervan. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, is this related at all to the equipment that was moved from the courthouse or no?
Through you, Mr. Chair. It's somewhat related, although this is an establishment of a completely new site because of the loss of the Sullivan Courthouse as well as of another site in the eastern part of the city. This is to make up for that expansion, the coverage, but the specific equipment that was pulled off the courthouse has already been deployed to other sites so that we could keep those channels operational.
Thanks. And just so that everybody's clear, could you explain what happened with the generator and was that because of our equipment or not?
I think through you, Mr. Chair, I think the state of the building had something to do with the reason why the generator needed to operate. Our equipment was actually moved off of the Sullivan Courthouse, I believe, at the beginning of the summer. We finished up probably at the beginning of September. There were still some remaining microwave antennas that were operating on the facility, so we did make the move of the primary channels, police, fire, 14 and 16, and the remaining microwave channels remained there, but due to the nature of the building and the condition, the generator had to operate the power for those other systems that were operating. And they were regional assets, thank you, regional assets to keep the interoperability communication throughout the region.
Thanks. So that was not primarily our equipment? Okay. Thank you.
Pleasure of the council. Roll call.
Counsel Calhoun.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Yes.
Counsel Kelly. Counsel Mallon.
Yes.
Counsel Siddiqui.
Yes.
Counsel Simmons.
Yes.
Counsel Toomey. Counsel Zondervan.
Yes.
Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
And agenda item number 7 is adopted on the affirmative vote with 9 in favor.
We now move to City Manager Agenda Item Number 8, transmitting communication from Louis A. DePasquale, City Manager, relative to the appropriation of a traffic enforcement grant from the Massachusetts Executive Office of Public Safety and Security's Traffic Enforcement Grant Program in the amount of $6,370 to the Grant Fund Police Department Salary and Wages Account, which will fund high-visibility traffic enforcement of motor vehicle laws related to impaired driving. This is pulled by Councilor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've already communicated to the manager and the commissioner. I don't feel we do traffic safety the way we should, and I'm not in favor of granting money for that effort. I've got a meeting scheduled with police staff to discuss this in more detail. Probably wouldn't be useful to do that here, but I am a solid no on the grant funding for this now. Thank you.
Pleasure of the council. Roll call.
On agenda item number 8, Counsel Calhoun.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Yes.
Counsel Kelly. Counsel Mallon.
Yes.
Counsel Siddiqui.
Yes.
Counsel Simmons.
Yes.
Counsel Toomey. Counsel Zondervan.
Yes.
Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
And agenda item number 8 is adopted on the affirmative vote, 8 in favor and 1 recorded in the negative.
We now move to City Manager Agenda Item Number 11, a communication transmitted from Louis A. DePasquale, City Manager, relative to recommendations for the block rates for water consumption and sewer use for the period beginning April 1st, 2019 and ending March 31st, 2020. This was pulled by Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm primarily concerned about the hidden costs in our water system because we've had several appropriations over this term that seem to be due to the chlorides in the water. And so even though we have no rate increases in our water, we still have real costs associated with operating our own water. So I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit in terms of how our water system costs compare to MWRA, especially if we take into account some of the hidden costs that happen because of our own water system.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Approximately, our cost to produce water is about half of the cost that it is to purchase the water from MWRA. Relating to the chlorides, at this point, there really hasn't been any that I'm aware of additional costs associated with operating the plant or the facility or our system. Obviously, the chlorides have gone up over the years, and the major cause is the Mass DOT salting and de-icing of the highway. Although I think you're relating to, let's say, potential individuals or homeowners or businesses having some side costs. We've had a few occurrences. It's not a major issue that I'm aware of. And all of those issues were resolved either through improved design or maintenance of those particular systems that were being discussed.
Councilor Zondervan.
Thanks. And why is it our cost 50%? What makes that difference? Why are we able to have the cost that low?
I'm not sure. No, I know. What I do know is it costs, $3,500 and change per million gallons, and it costs us, $1,900 per million gallons to produce. Looking at comparable portions of our operation that, our treatment facility and all the people associated with the treatment facility and the operation of that comes up. Just those are the numbers that come up when I calculate those.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. When we had the drought and we had to pay the monthly fee to the MWRA, the monthly fee times 12, if it had continued for the year, would have almost equaled the entire water department budget. So that gives you an example of how expensive it can be.
Councilor Zondervan.
And in terms of the chlorides issue, you indicate that that's gotten worse over the years. Do we expect that to continue? Is it stabilized? Where do we see that going?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. We've been working since the 60s with chlorides and or salt in particular initially, and we did a lot of work in the 80s with Mass Highway at the time. Things such as removing having a salt pile out in the open, putting it in a shed so that the runoff doesn't contaminate it, looking at de-icing, ways of reducing de-icing, and we continue to do that. Some of the problem with working with Mass Highway is today everybody wants black pavement. They want it to be no ice and so on. So it is pretty difficult to totally convince, but we are working with them, and they have done a significant better job at controlling the amount of salt. So at least they don't repeat locations, but it's pretty difficult to do that. And again, we've initiated a study with Mass DOT last week. Actually, was the kickoff meeting to see if any of those contributions have changed. Is it more businesses? Is it still Mass Highway or Mass DOT that's creating it? And we're going to work with them and do whatever it is we can to work to minimize and continue to minimize the salt applications, or whether it be calcium chloride, sodium chloride, magnesium chloride. These are all elements that increase chlorides, obviously, all of them do. And the switch in the old days from sodium chloride to calcium chloride really have hurt us from a chloride's perspective, but it really wasn't as the panacea that we thought in the old days. But they are doing a lot better. They use magnesium chloride as a pre-treatment, which is significantly less of a problem. They've significantly reduced the tonnage of chlorides they use on an annual basis. But again, we need to continue to work on that. And it is difficult. I mean, typically the trend is up and down, but the trend has been increasing from a chlorides perspective. I mean, we are going to continue to work with that. And there are some other ideas that, like New Hampshire has 12 surface waters that have chloride impaired areas. And again, the point about chloride impaired is the EPA says at 250 milligrams per liter, it's chloride impaired. It's strictly an aesthetic issue. Not that we shouldn't be paying attention, but it isn't anything critical from a water quality perspective, although, as you mentioned in the past, that potentially corrosive and so on and so forth. And again, most of those corrosivity issues are resolved through proper design and maintenance of whatever those high-temperature facilities are. But we will continue, have worked in the past, and will continue to work with Mass DOT and anyone else that we can to reduce chloride distribution in our watershed.
Thank you for that. And so even though our water rates are not going up, our sewer rates do keep going up. So what's the logic between, because, as a ratepayer, of course, it's all the same to us. We just pay more for our water.
Hi, through you, Mr. Mayor. I'd say, and I can look to David to fill in as well, I think people know we have a pretty aggressive capital program for sewer improvements. So when you look at the 5-year plan, what we've done most recently, looking at the Alewife, but also looking forward, when you look at the budget, the things we're really paying for out of the sewer rate, significant improvements in the port, looking at a stormwater tank to reduce flooding in the Tobin area, in the Alewife, looking at future construction on Kirkland Street, River Street, capital repairs, looking at, maintaining our existing infrastructure, and then also looking at, one is our ongoing operating cost, looking at the MWRA rate that we pay for the sewage that we send to the MWRA treatment plant, and so that directly affects the sewer rate as well. And then also looking at, so going back to the bond schedule and, looking at the projects that we have upcoming, one of the things that we were actually able to decrease the rate a little bit from what we thought it might be, a month ago, was based on the really favorable rate we got for the bond sales.
For you, Mr. Mayor, I would just add, following up what Kathy said, I think when you look at the sewer budget, 90% of it is debt service and MWRA. So even though we do have some control of our debt service, it's really not the budget operating. It's specific areas that we feel like we have to address the MWRA, which we have no control over really. But the commitment this city has made to sewer infrastructure is second to none. And Owen and Kathy have been a key part of that. But it's a willingness to recognize the importance, and maybe we can talk a little about what we've been doing specifically.
I think we talked a little bit about, we work closely with the MWRA in terms of what their rates are so that we know those going into the sewer rate discussion. And then, looking at over the last number of years, we've really increased what we've called our capital repair program. And that's looking at locations where we don't have significant infrastructure projects, we don't have significant sewer separation, but we have aged sewer and drainage pipes, and so we're doing much more lining and other sort of non-significant construction repairs, and so you're seeing that as a much larger percentage of the budget as well, in addition to the other larger capital programs that are much more visible that people really see. And again, it's really a commitment to maintaining the existing infrastructure, prioritizing water quality improvements, continued focus on eliminating combined sewer overflows to the water bodies, and then just also increase looking at phosphorus control, looking in the future with our various permits with the total maximum daily load that's really coming into play on the Charles River, and all of those programs really drive a lot of the programs that we're looking at.
Thanks. In terms of the longer-term future, and you highlight this in your report, that in some sense, as we get better at water conservation and reduce the amount of water we put down the sewers, then you have less revenue, and the work that you're highlighting is really important. So what's our thinking in terms of continuing to finance that work?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, one of the things I would say is that if you look at, and I think we talk about it a little bit in here, but thinking about people's total bill as opposed to the rate increase. So if you're being more efficient, then you're using less water. So in order to generate the same amount of funds, we need a higher rate increase. If your people are saving water, that doesn't necessarily lead to a higher bill. And so, there's two different ways of thinking about that in terms of, we do need still increasing revenue to fund all the programs that are really critical to the infrastructure, but we need to think about the total bill as well as the rate increase. So it's balancing those discussions and what people really focus on. And I would just add, we look at every year when we're going through this, what other communities are paying. And I would say, we look at other MWRA communities, we're about a third of the way down in terms of what people in other communities are paying for their water and sewer bill. And so, why we continue to have significant investments, I would say, it's very strategic investment and sort of financially sound investment. So, our total bills per household are very much in line with other communities.
Thank you.
Pleasure of the council. Councilor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have one suggestion, which would be when we tell people about this, we don't lead with the 0% water increase, because we did that in the past, and it's sort of confusing because people don't differentiate between water and sewer. So it's whatever it is, and that 0% is part of it. I think that will make life simpler for everyone. And I would take this opportunity to ask Mr. O'Riordan to sort of reiterate what he said the other day at a meeting about a flooding issue, which was it's a flat city and we have difficulty moving water, and so we're building these cisterns to hold water and so forth, but there's a limit to how we can move water out, and in a climate that's likely to get wetter, not just overall, but wetter in episodic events, our inability to move water as quickly as we would like in this flat city is likely to become more problematic, and it's going to cost some money to adjust to that, and arguably this is how much money we think it's worth. And if it's not, then maybe we should charge more.
Mr. O'Riordan.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think, Councillor, you encapsulated what it is that I said at that meeting last week. And again, we were situated in the basement of a person's property where they'd experienced pretty severe flooding. And I think it's just important to recognize that when you're sitting in the basement of a person's property, you're at the same elevation as our storm drains. So as our storm drains fill up, the basement will also fill up. And it's important for people to realize that there is a vulnerability associated with that type of development, and people need to recognize that before they begin to consider that as an option in terms of their property. And again, as climate change impacts impress upon us, it's also important to recognize that that risk becomes more severe, and our ability to mitigate it is very, very limited. And so it's just important that residents continue to be mindful of the increased risk associated with that, the nature of that type of development. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The concern at the meeting was people didn't know there was a risk, and I can't think of any more effective way than to have the DPW director at a city council meeting saying that, but clearly we need to find other ways as well. The last question I had was to the city manager. I understood you to say, Mr. DePasquale, that the 12-month cost of MWRA, if the monthly cost that we had is extrapolated, which may not be a perfect comparison, would be equal to our entire city operating budget?
Mr. Manager.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, when we did not use city water during the drought and we had to lease it from the MWRA, their monthly cost, if we continued to do that for a year, was approximately the total cost of the entire water budget. Absolutely.
Okay, so it's just the water operating budget,
Yes.
not the city operating.
No,
okay,
the
great.
water.
I'm glad I clarified that. Okay, super. Thank you very much.
Pleasure of the council. On adopting the order, roll call.
On agenda item number 11, Counsel Calhoun.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Yes.
Counsel Kelly. Counsel Mallon.
Yes.
Counsel Siddiqui.
Yes.
Counsel Simmons.
Yes.
Counsel Toomey. Counsel Zondervan.
Yes.
Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
And agenda item number 11 is adopted on the affirmative vote with 9 in favor.
Okay. We now move to the calendar items. The only charter right not pulled was number 3, but I'm going to pull that because it needs a roll call. Charter right number 1, a communication transmitted from Louis A. DePasquale, City Manager, relative to the biannual City of Cambridge resident telephone survey for 2018, pulled by Councilor Carlo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the manager. Mr. Manager, you might have heard during public comment there were some questions about the particular questions and the wording. If the council was interested in modifying the wording or even adding a question, that would be through the Government Affairs Committee? Is that right? How does a question get modified?
Mr. Manager.
So traditionally, it's been made by the city manager's office, I've been told, but certainly we would be open to any discussion in order to make we want this to work.
Sure.
It's important that we're asking the right questions. I can tell you, I spent a lot of time with Lee and Lisa going over some of the questions, and should we continue to say them? How can we say them differently? Should we say them differently? Because you got to be careful of the history. But it is real important that we word it in a way that we're asking the question in a way we understand what we're asking. And some of these questions are tricky because they can sound one way and mean something else. We've really spent a lot of time, but I certainly would be open to any thoughts on how we can make it better. And just, again, it's really, since we've been doing it since 2000, be able to keep the history of it, but also find areas. And I think we added a lot of new questions in working with Lee this year on bicycles and that. So certainly, we're certainly open to that.
That wasn't meant, Mr. Mayor, to be a criticism of all the questions. It was a good comment that was made, and the specific comment made a lot of sense. There is one omission that just stuns me. If the major thing the council does is significant zoning changes, and planning and zoning the question on planning and zoning was taken out. And quite frankly, if you hear about issues that the public feels concerned about, that's one gigantic area that they feel that. So I won't ask you why, I'll just assume there was a reason, but that's something that's got to be put back. And I would love to hear any comments on it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there is a question in here that's been in here for 20 years about the balance between neighborhood preservation and development. So how we feel we're doing on the overall development, on the overall balance. The question on whether zoning and planning, yeah, I will have to look into that. And
it literally says omitted this year.
Yeah, and usually that's because it's covered in another question.
Well,
so let me get back to you on that question.
I would suggest that that's a very specific area that we ask indirectly. It might be good to ask directly. And lastly, this was a good document, as it always is. We learn things. Affordable housing, on importance, affordable housing came in 35 times more than taxes or concerns on each. But the graphics were terrible. There's gray ink. I know you know this because you've seen it. Now, it might be my eyes, but honestly, I can't read. And I know the questions later on spell it out, but maybe in the future, forget the gray ink. And then when you have colors, dark blue and a slightly lighter blue, again, the difference isn't sufficient. Minor things, but if the public's going to see this, it should look as good as the work being done. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I have Councilor Siddiqui, then Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Thank you. Through you. I had a question about, and a few questions about just survey goals and thinking about, I see here that it says the web version of the survey was completed by about over 2,500 individuals, and I understand that this is meant to capture a snapshot, and it's for a month and 2 days. I just think that some of these numbers are so low We have so many residents in our city. We have over 100,000 people, and if we're spending money and energy on this, I think we have to think about goals of, we want 5,000 people, or 10,000 people by the next few years. Every 2 years there's an increase. I think given how much energy and time and money we're putting into this, that's an important conversation to have, because I do want to make sure I understand that the telephone, it's a valid random telephone survey, and then we are making the web version available, but I'd love to see that number go up. And additionally, I concur with Councillor Carlone's point about some of these questions, and I'd love to talk a little bit more about whether we're asking the right ones, how we can ask them better, and so forth. But thank you for sharing it, and I look forward to possibly working on how we get more residents and actually answering the survey.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you, through you. Yeah, the survey is very interesting. I think to Councillor Siddiqui's point, the number chosen, I'm sure that the survey company would say it was statistically significant. There is a big difference, though, in the number of people who responded online, 2,500, and the number of people on phone, 400. And as I went back into the more detailed breakdown of, the scale of excellent to good to poor to don't know, and I looked at the differences between some of the responses for those surveyed online and those surveyed by phone, there were some fairly substantial spreads. And I thought, well, I wonder why that is. And then I noticed that on one of them, one of the questions was, Cambridge is a great place to raise a child, and don't know was answered by about, I think, almost a third of the online people. And then when you flip that around, Cambridge is a great place to retire, it's the other way. So, that would tell me that the online people skew younger, and I don't know how you balance those out. But I did want to point out that on the bike questions, the new questions, they were actually, the answers between the two groups were closer together. The spreads were much wider on many of the other questions. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. My name's Ernie Pikopoulos. I'm with the polling company, Opinion Dynamics. I just wanted to comment about the web numbers, the online numbers. We do not have the same amount of control, actually no control, over the representativeness of those responses, because they're completely an opt-in situation. The questionnaire is simply offered on the city's website, and whoever wants to can log on and take the survey. On the phone survey, while I know it sounds like 400 is a small number, particularly in comparison to the web, we have control over that. We have quotas that are set for various demographic groups to ensure that it's a representative sample throughout the whole city. And we can't really assign a margin of error to the online survey, but we can to the phone survey. It's about plus or minus 5 points, which means that if you did 100 of these surveys, 95 of them would give you results that fall 5 points on either side of a percentage, assuming a 50-50 split on a question. So I think in looking at the results, you can have a lot more confidence in the phone survey. I think the online survey is an attempt to allow as many citizens as possible to participate and have their voice heard, but isn't necessarily as representative as the phone survey.
That's interesting, and then that actually has some potential policy implications if we look at where the differences are. So there's a question that says, visited the City of Cambridge website, and the phone people, 27% of them said never. And that's, the way that we try to communicate a lot these days. There's an awful lot of information put on our website, and those of us who are regular users are, like, well, it's on the website. How did you not notice that? But obviously, 27% of the people who answered the phone aren't looking at the website. And then in the other group, you've got, you know, the very high users, 14% or whatever 14 said, you know, they have visited it more than 26 times. I'm assuming this was over a year. It doesn't say visited the city website. I mean, in the past year or whatever.
It was over 12 months.
And,
yep,
yeah.
over a 12-month period.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. There are a number of discrepancies like that. On several of the core questions, however, it is interesting that there is some similarity on various service ratings and overall satisfaction with the city. But you're absolutely right. And I think that, you know, kind of points up the differences between the two in terms of reliability. Really, the online survey is more of an opportunity to offer people, in as broad a sense as possible, the ability to participate.
Okay, and then I guess that leads me to the overarching question is that we do this survey because we've always done it every 2 years, but how does it really inform, you know, the policies or the, you know, the programs or the methods or, you know, how are we really using it? Because in my experience, at least, I guess this is only the second one that I've had the opportunity to talk about in a council meeting. We all say, well, that's interesting. Hey, that's interesting. And then it's like, okay, it was all interesting. And particularly with the affordable housing question, which I think is just a sort of open-ended question, but, you know, we've had lots of debates about, well, what does affordable housing mean? It means a lot of different things. Is it housing that's affordable to you? Is it housing that's affordable to low-income people? You know, I mean, what does that actually mean? And so I have a hard time sort of like just saying, well, it's the number one issue because everyone said that, but, you know, are they all talking about the same thing, and how do we tease that out?
That's a good question. What you see, you're right, it is an open-ended question, those first two questions in the survey. And what you see there listed as, for example, more affordable housing is our attempt to code a whole range of responses into a category that, you know, holds together as affordable housing. You do have the ability, though, to look at the verbatim responses, which will show you, you know, a more granular kind of breakdown of exactly what they were talking about in each case. So that is available to the city.
Okay. Well, I hope that someone is looking at that because I think that would be helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say that obviously this is important to present it to our department heads and then see where we're going well. We had a meeting today from 4 to 5, presenting all of this, letting the department heads be aware of it, and now it's putting it all together. You know, there is a 5%, like we said, but how can we take this and really now figure out where we need to move forward, what we're doing well, what we can do better? And I think that, to me, is the most important thing here, is to use it as a tool to say, these are areas where we need to continue to do better. And that's what we're going to talk about with our department heads, and Lee's really leading the charge to say, what does this information really mean, and how do we then make it better so that the residents feel like we're even providing a better service than we are? Fortunately, I think with the numbers we've received, we're in good, people are satisfied, but we always got to continue to strive harder. Customer service is, to me, the most important thing we do. So it's really taking it and saying, how do we make the numbers even better?
Councilor Van.
Thank you. Just to follow on some of that previous discussion, there are other tools available to us now that would allow us to code some of the survey takers online or even on mobile phones to a similar degree as the telephone survey takers. So it might be worth our while to invest in some of that technology so that we can capture more of the online survey takers.
Yeah, if I could, through you, Mr. Mayor, one of the things I think has to be considered before the next time we do this is whether or not we want to shift the methodology from phone to either a full-on online study that can be controlled in terms of the sample, or some form of hybrid methodology, which would be part phone and part web. I should point out that about 43% of the phone portion of the survey was cell phone-only households, so that's becoming a more and more difficult problem to account for as well. in addition to the fact that it's more and more difficult to get people to cooperate on telephone surveys because of all the screening methodologies where people can just ignore a phone call. So I think it's probably prudent for the city to consider next time around some kind of consideration, at least, of shifting methodology away from pure phone.
Thank you. I certainly agree. You mentioned that the verbatim answers are available. Can we get a copy of that?
Yep.
Thanks. So one of the things that I did notice was that some of the answers do seem to be trending a little bit negative in the last few years. Particularly, I was looking at number 10, welcoming to all races and cultures, 18, access to affordable housing, and 20, balance of construction versus neighborhood preservation, as you mentioned. Some of those are trending significantly down since about 2012. So I was wondering if you could comment on that. What do we make of that trend?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, particularly on the question about welcoming to all races and cultures, I think we have to be a little cautious of those trends because there were some wording changes from year to year that may have impacted on some of that shift. With regard to the affordable housing question, I think you're correct, but also I think it's important to note that the percentage of people who rated that characteristic as poor went down pretty significantly this time from 2016. It went from 52% in 2016 to 47% today. So, it's a question of whether the glass is half empty or half full. I think that's a good sign that there are fewer people rating that characteristic as poor. Although I agree with you that the other trends are, I think, in line with the fact that so many people mention affordable housing as the most important problem facing the city and the most important issue that the city should be addressing. So I'm not surprised with that. But I think there is some good news on the fact that the poor rating did decrease.
Thanks. I agree. I guess my overall sense from the survey is that we see economic opportunities down, and so generally speaking, is up. Generally speaking, economic conditions are improving for the wealthier people, but then that means it is more challenging for people who are not able to take advantage of that. So, I kind of wrestle with this similar question as my colleagues. What are we to do with that information? It seems kind of intuitively obvious that would be the case, and our survey is bearing that out. So what do we do about that? How do we spread the wealth more, if you will, so that everybody benefits from our economic advantages? And then I guess similar to some of my colleagues, I wonder about asking other questions. Are we trying to limit the number of questions, and is that why we're dropping some and adding others? And maybe as we shift the methodology, maybe that's an opportunity to, have like a short form and a long form, and if some people don't want to answer lots of questions, then they can opt out of that. But I do think it would be useful to think about how we can take advantage of the opportunity to get a lot more information, because as you say, it is difficult to get people to participate in the first place. Once you got them, you want to get as much information from them as possible. And we have lots of other issues that we wrestle with, climate change and flooding and heat, tree canopy and so forth. So, it would be useful if we could have more questions on different topics to gauge where people are at.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yeah, it's always a challenge to try to be comprehensive in a survey like this while still making sure that we don't go over the limit in terms of pushing people too far on the phone, because we're just about at the limit here. I think 65 or so questions, which translates to about an average of about 16 minutes on the phone, which is kind of pushing the edge of the envelope. And we want to keep down the number of terminates and people who break off during the survey. But yeah, it's always a balancing act and always tough to incorporate as much as you can. But as someone said before, we've been doing this now since 2000, and there are a number of core questions that we want to make sure we keep because we have that great trend line going back 19 years now. So, some of the basic questions on satisfaction with services, we do want to keep. But there are always, as far as I can recall, there are always changes from year to year on questions that come up. The bike questions being the best example this year that were new.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I also just want to reemphasize that this is such a great sort of data point, if you will, right, when you look at it. And over the years, when we've really wanted to go more in depth, we've done it on housing, we've done it on open space, we're doing it on, we'll be doing some very soon on cable and digital equity. We can do individual surveys when we really need to go deeper. So this is really the opportunity to just be looking at overall trends. I think we have the fact that this is our 10th survey is really amazing that we're able to look at trends. And then if we want to go into more detail, we may want to do a separate survey about a specific area if we're really concerned about a trend or we're not understanding some of the underlying issues around it.
Great, thank you. I completely agree.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I just wanted to say, I think doing this survey is a great opportunity for us to see where we are doing well and where those challenges exist, especially for our department heads if you're thinking about open space or thinking about traffic or planning. And I think having that through line of the last number of years to keep those data points is really important. I thank you for clarifying the number or the percentage of cell phones versus home phones, because that was a question I had. I know my husband actually answered the survey through our home phone, which I actually forgot that we had. It just exists in a corner and charges all the time. But he was on the phone for a long time, much longer than 16 minutes. So I can see that that's very, very time intensive. And I'm not sure how much the survey taker was, really capturing. He was talking a lot. He had a lot to say. And I imagine that people, if you get them on the phone, they're going to have a lot to say. So at 16 minutes for 400 people, that's 106 hours. So, and as people, have mentioned before, I think we do want to dig a little bit deeper, particularly around some of these issues like affordable housing. I think the Vice Mayor brought up a good point. What do people mean when they say affordable housing? Do they mean that I can't, I would like my kids to live here. I can't afford to live here anymore. I think we should have more affordable housing so we'll have a much more diverse community. What does that really mean? So it is probably time to think about shifting the methodology while keeping those throughput of that data points. I had some questions that I think a lot of people had asked before around sort of a little bit of a trend dip on the overall satisfaction of the city. So it is something to keep an eye out. And hopefully you guys had that conversation today when you talked to your department heads about how to kind of look at that in the fiscal year 20 budget. So thank you for your work. And I appreciate the presentation and the very, very thorough survey.
Councillor Kelly.
Thank you. I find it an interesting survey. I think it tells us generally what we already think we know, which is people are pretty happy to be in Cambridge. I don't know what to do with any of this, to tell you the God's honest truth, because, for example, if I look at the ability to get around town by bicycle, we've got 13% are saying excellent, 37% are saying good, 27% are saying fair. Only 16% are saying they don't know, but 53% of respondents have ridden a bike twice, once, or 0 times in the past year. So how we figure out how to value answers that people give that they may not have a lot of personal experience in, I don't know, and I think this is worth a much deeper conversation, perhaps at the Government Ops Committee, because we can all pull data points from here because the survey says something, but honestly, I don't know where they fit in setting policy. One thing I find super interesting is the library usage, and I think that we have a phenomenal library system, but we've got 42% of the respondents saying that they've used it no times, one time, or 12 times in the past year. So my question becomes, do we know from the data, from the survey, what groups, or from some other place, what groups of people we're missing, and how we bring those people either into the libraries or expand the services of the libraries to reach and attract those people? And I'm not asking for a discussion about the libraries now. I'm just saying there's something here that tells us something, but I don't know where we tease out the information after this, and I would love a much longer discussion on that sort of thing. So at the end of all this, with the Vice Mayor's consent, I would suggest we have a committee meeting about this as well.
Mr. Manager?
Those are some of the questions that we've been talking about to try to see what that really means. And I think it's important that we said that we really take a look at this, especially in areas that we need to do better than. But I do want to make one point that I think has not been made tonight that is something I'm very proud of. And that is, if you take a look at extreme satisfaction with overall experiences of the city, we are at a record high level of the 18 years. So that is a tribute to everybody, all of you, and to the department head. So I just want to bring that point home as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Couple things from me. That it's hard to kind of sort of pull out what really how people are feeling about the big picture in the world. I mean, we've gone down a little bit with people's satisfaction with the city, but people are under a lot of anxiety and stress these days that isn't necessarily related to the city. It's on the national level, it's on the state level. I think there are a lot of people probably feeling a little bit more rotten these days than they did 2 years ago or 4 years ago. And I don't know how that ends up playing into people's answers either. But on the, whenever we do something like this, the thing that I think concerns a lot of us is the representation, right? I'm looking at my friend Scott Hannon out there. I would bet to say that of the online answers, people who answered online and the people who answered on phone, probably none of them were some of our 500 plus homeless people that have opinions about the city. Probably not a lot of them were, if it's like anything else that we've seen, they're probably not representative of the wide range of people in this city. So, I would like to see us, as we think about other ways to do this, I think of the participatory budgeting, and I'm not saying we have to go to that extreme, but, why don't we set up we're talking about this on the school side with extended day. We have after-school programs at the Margaret Fuller House, at the Cambridge Community Center, at the East End House, organizations that work primarily with low-income folks who aren't always represented. Why don't we set up computers there for a week and have them get all their parents when they come to pick up their kids? So I think we've got to really think about who answers these questions to make sure that we're hearing all voices. So I would like us to kind of consider that 2 years from now. So if there is nothing further on placing the matter on file, all those in favor say aye.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilor Kelly. Are you referring it? Or you said you had to have a meeting, you didn't refer it. Do you want to refer it?
Well, I asked if the Vice Mayor would be, I would like to refer it, but if people think we've sort of hashed it out far enough here, then I'm okay with that. But yes, I would motion that we refer it to the Government Ops Committee.
On a motion by Councilor Kelly to refer the survey to the Government Ops Committee, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and it is so referred. We now move to Charter Right number 2, transmitting communication from Louis A. DePasquale, City Manager, relative to a supplemental appropriation of $2,600,000 from free cash to the Public Works Other Ordinary Maintenance account to fund snowstorm-related expenses associated with snow plowing and snow removal contracts, salt, other materials, repair costs. Pulled by Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. So I was trying to understand a little bit the correlation between the cost and the amount of snow and the number of incidents. And it does seem to be relatively correlated to the amount of snow, but I know the number of incidents also plays a role. So if you could just help us understand a little bit how that works, because it didn't seem like it was a terribly intense winter, but we still are coming back for $1 million. So.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the one thing I would say, Councillor, at the outset is that from our perspective, the snow season is not over. I would ask you to recall 8 years ago that we had got that 1st of April storm, which was a very significant storm event. And so we continue to think about snow over the next 3 to 4 weeks at least. And so we had a portion of this money is set aside so as to provide for 4 salting events and 1 additional large snow event in the off chance that we get something like that. So on the basis, and again, I think we had provided you with a report in December of this year, and in that we had indicated that we have increased the costs, or we've increased the amount of funding associated with managing our winter weather conditions each year for the last number of years, and this year is no different to that. Our expectation is that in terms, if you look at it just on a per inch basis, this will end up something in the order of about $50,000 per inch. And again, looking at inches alone is not a good way to actually think about snow, given the fact that there are salting events that don't necessarily amount to any number of inches of snow. And again, we had 17 of those this year. I think the other thing to bear in mind as well when we think about snow events is that we plan our operation based on forecasts that we receive. And sometimes those forecasts can be inaccurate. They can either overpredict or underpredict. A good example of that this year was that the last storm that we got 3 weeks ago, we had anticipated between 6 and 7 inches of snow. We ended up with 14 inches of snow, which is considerably higher. And so there was an earlier event 2 days before that where we had expected to get 6 or 7 inches of snow, and we got 2 inches of snow. And so you plan your contractor amount based on the forecast that you get, and you try and do that within maybe 7 or 8 hours of the event so that the confidence you have in those forecasts is at its highest, and you still have enough time to be able to bring forces into the city so as to be able to manage that event. I think the other thing as well is that if you think about the first event this year, we had an extremely challenging snow event in January of this year, where temperature dropped dramatically immediately after the snow fell, and it took us days to clear streets and sidewalks to the extent that we would generally like to clear them as a result of that event. And so every storm is different, and so like I said, measuring on a per inch basis in and of itself is an inadequate way to do it. So it wasn't the most severe winter. There were some really tricky storms during the course of that winter, but I think up to now, I think we've done okay. But again, I don't think, from our perspective, the season at this point in time is not over.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would just add, as someone this is my 3rd winter as city manager, I will tell you that obviously we are careful with how we spend our money related to snow, but because we're in the financial position we're in, when in doubt, we prepare for the worst. And I think that's a safe policy for the residents of this city. So there may be times that we've prepared for a lot more inches than we ended up receiving, but we all on this table spend a lot of time and have come to the conclusion we'd rather go that way than not being prepared. So if you said, did we spend some extra money being prepared for stuff that didn't happen, I would say yes, but it's with a lot of thought and a lot of pushback and a lot of discussion. But I have great respect for the team at this table in terms of when they say this is what they need and why they need it. It's a good discussion. I think we make the right call, but I will tell you it's a call that usually means probably spending more than most cities in the surrounding area would do under the same situation. Because of our financial position, we feel that's important to be able to do that.
Thank you for that. So related to that event you mentioned a few weeks ago, we did get some concerns from people around bike lanes and keeping those clear. And I was wondering if if it made sense to, when there's a lot of uncertainty about the amount of snow that we're getting, if it would make sense to be a little bit more likely to declare a snow emergency, whether that would help with clearing the bike lanes or not.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and again, I'll have John jump in and talk a little bit more about our bike facilities. I would say that the resources that we've put into clearing bike facilities in the city over the last number of years has gone up significantly and dramatically. And I think we continue to learn as we go through each season, most particularly the last 2 seasons, as to how best to manage bike facilities. Last year, if you recall, we took out the flexi posts before a large event, and there was criticism associated with that, but in terms of sort of clearing the facility, it actually, from our perspective, worked out better, but perhaps it didn't provide the safety that cyclists were looking for subsequent to that. In this instance, we took out some of them, not others, and I'm not sure as to whether or not, from the perspective of our drivers, that worked out as well. But John can go into more details in terms of how he feels about the way we have operated in terms of our bike facilities.
For you, Mr. Mayor. I would just say this, Council, that we learned many years ago that we couldn't wait for certain facilities. I think there's a lot of cities and towns out there that when they're doing pedestrian snow clearing or they're doing bike lane snow clearing, they're doing that after the fact. I would say at least 10, maybe 15 years ago now, we started to deploy our sidewalk and our smaller piece of equipment at the same time that we were deploying our street stuff. So even when we're gearing up for something big and it ends up being something small, we have the same number of pieces of equipment on our sidewalks and on our bike facilities as we do in the street. So we're doing those operations all at the same time, and that can be taxing on a lot of our people because they're smaller pieces of equipment. They're in there for a lot of hours. I do think there's a balance for us. I mean, we really need to think about as we continue to expand on the bike facilities to make sure that we're not forgetting about our pedestrian responsibilities. There's about 23 miles of pedestrian sidewalks that we take care of, and we want to make sure that we continue to do that. So we're continuing to plan for the future. We continue to look at that. But I would say that the bike facilities, I think a little bit of the difference with the protected bike facilities, and we saw that this year, whether we had a snow ban or not, is that when you're plowing those facilities, you end up with a windrow of snow on both sides, whether there's a parked car there or it's up against the flexi post. And this was the perfect season where you had, thawing days and freezing nights. So we were actually out I would say we were out salting bike facilities more than we were on the roadways after a storm. So we're definitely, it's not in the back of our mind, it's right at the forefront, and continue to try to improve on that.
Great, thank you, and certainly want to affirm that you do a great job. We always get the complaints, of course, and so we're always trying to figure out how can we do even better. Thank you.
Councillor Mallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Commissioner Reardon. I just wanted to ask you quickly about the brine pilot that was piloted this year in North Cambridge and whether that was successful and if it saved us any money and if it is something that we might look at expanding next year.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and again, I'll ask John to provide you with a more detailed response here. So we did the brine pilot in an area just south of North Mass Ave, what we call the Montgomery Grid or the French Village. That's an area between Ringe Avenue and Cedar Street and Massachusetts Avenue and I've forgotten the other street on the west side, Clifton Street, and then also along Linear Path. And again, we use the brine for pre-treatment purposes there. We think that from a pre-treatment perspective, it worked out really, really well. I think we'd like to expand that next year. I wouldn't think we will be expanding it across the entire community next year, but I think given the success we had in terms of pre-treatment this year, I think it's something that we want to continue to use in the city, primarily from an environmental perspective, given the fact that using something less than between 50 and 25% of the salt that you're using if you're using direct salt. And I think from the perspective of just keeping the streets clear of snow, it was reasonably successful. But John can go into sort of the cost and so on associated with it.
Yeah, I won't break down all the costs for you, but I can tell you this year we weren't saving money using brine, and that's primarily because we were purchasing brine, and it's really in small quantities. I think when you want to think about saving money by using brine, you're producing it yourself, and it's something that we've talked about and something in the future that we hope to get to where we're actually making our own brine, and then the cost for that product will come down. I do want to say, and I think Owen said it the right way, is that it worked great for pre-treatment. The beauty of that is you're putting a liquid down on the pavement. You can do it several days in advance if you want to, as long as we don't have any other precipitation. It stays on the road. You don't get the scatter like you do with salt. So that worked out really well. But I think people need to understand that's a tool in the toolbox. It wasn't perfect in all the storms when we got these kind of heavier storms, and we would continue to just use the brine in those instances. I think there's times when we kind of said to ourselves, well, maybe we need to go back to regular salt, which we didn't. But those are things that we need to learn. So as we begin to look at this, to expand this further into the city, it's how do we use it in the right way? How do we use the rest of the tools that we have?
If I could, Mr. Mayor, beyond that, we also, as part of the pilot, used brine on some of our bike facilities as well as on some of our sidewalks. And that was less successful as a pre-treatment mechanism. And I think primarily because of just the nature of the way we sprayed the brine on those facilities. And again, this was the first year that we've used brine the way we have, and I think we can change our process next year so as to better use brine on both our bike facilities and our sidewalks. And again, from an environmental perspective, it's certainly we're using less salt, but ultimately, from a cost perspective, if we're going to continue to use this, we would need to begin to manufacture it ourselves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. So if we're going to expand it, it would just go into like another neighborhood or, okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Councilor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the manager and staff. I think it's an impossible task to clear snow to everyone's satisfaction, and I think you did a reasonably good job on that. I do think that we need to revisit the reasonableness of expecting people to clear the corners where the crosswalk hits the street, because that gets plowed up by the city, and it's no fault of the city. You got to put the snow someplace. At some point, it is glacial ice that no homeowner can reasonably be expected to remove. So we have people struggling over it, and I don't know if that's what we want, but certainly that's what we have, and that's what we'll continue to have unless we can figure out a way to assist with that removal. The word bike facilities has come up quite a bit. I'm assuming you mean bike lanes and not bike racks. The bike racks in front of City Hall were in fact shoveled, which I greatly appreciate, but for the most part that's not the case. And I just wanted to clarify that we have no policy for clearing snow from bike racks or parking meters for that matter, which often double as a bike rack, even if not a formal one.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor, given our resources, we have no policy at this point in time to clear out bike racks, and I don't expect that we'll be doing so in the near future. We have a certain number of resources, and if we were going to deploy them anyplace else, we would deploy them to clear corners, to be quite frank with you. And again, that's something that we do immediately after, the day after a snow event. One of our top priorities is clearing corners, which we recognize is a big deal for residents and homeowners and can be extremely difficult. So, but at this point in time, we are not expected to begin to clear out bike racks.
Okay, and then a related question is the difficulty of getting people to shovel. So if you could explain how much of your resources wind up getting deployed actually for people with shovels, which is, of course, where a lot of the smaller stuff might happen.
So, Council, you're talking about city forces? Am I correct?
Yes, city forces, whether they're employees or contractors.
So I would say in a typical snowstorm, we probably have about maybe 15 people, and those are really building folks. So folks are custodians that are typically in this building and other buildings. Their main responsibility is around city buildings. So some of that is done with shovelers, and some of that is done with our sidewalk machines. When we get beyond the buildings and we're looking at, other pedestrian areas that we're responsible for where we'd actually have somebody behind a shovel, I'd say by the time we get all of our equipment filled and between, people calling in sick and the other things that happen, I mean, even in this last storm, I think we had 3 people that were left to shovel. We do have contracts that we've put out over the years. Last year, we got a great response with a good contractor. Unfortunately, that contractor backed out this year. So we did have a small contract in place, but it was even difficult to get that going as well. So to get people to physically shovel with shovels is difficult for us.
Yeah, I got 2 boys, and I absolutely understand. I would say it's beyond difficult. It's bordering on impossible. So I'm not faulting anyone. I just think that we should be constantly rethinking what a reasonable expectation of both snow clearance and at some point usage of our streets by people who are forced to walk there because the sidewalks can't reasonably be made safe for passage. Thank you.
Roll call.
On calendar item number 2, Council Calhoun.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Yes.
Council Kelly. Council Mallon.
Yes.
Council Siddiqui.
Yes.
Council Simmons. Council Toomey. Council Zondervan.
Yes.
Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
And calendar item number 2 is adopted on the affirmative vote with 8 in favor and 1 recorded as absent.
Calendar item number 3, transmitting communication from Louis A. DePasquale, City Manager, relative to the appropriation of $400,000 from free cash to the Public Works Public Investment Fund Extraordinary Expenditures Account to fund snowstorm-related road repairs. I pulled this because it requires a roll call. Is there any discussion? Roll call.
On calendar item number 3, Councilor Calhoun.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Devereaux.
Yes.
Council Kelly. Council Mallon.
Yes.
Council Siddiqui.
Yes.
Council Simmons. Council Toomey. Council Zondervan.
Yes.
Mayor McGovern.
Yes.
And a calendar item number 3 is adopted on the affirmative vote with 8 in favor, 1 recorded as absent.
A communication, we move to charter right number 4, communication transmitted from Louis A. DePasquale, City Manager, relative to awaiting report item number 18-86 regarding a report on replacing failed 4,000K LED streetlights, LED streetlights. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to the city electrician. And so we've had a lot of discussion with residents and among the council about whether these 4,000 Kelvin street lamps are too bright, too blue, unhealthy, and so forth. And I appreciate that there are things that people can do on their own to ensure that the blue light doesn't interrupt their circadian rhythms, including managing their own use of screens and, that sort of thing. And there's also a process that we have, I don't know how widely known it is, for you to come and dim and install and screen lights that are shining too brightly into people's homes. And the memo is good in that it does show that the majority of the street lights, almost 4,000 of them, are on a schedule to automatically dim starting at 10 p.m. But that said, I think the original policy order that this is in response to asked about the feasibility of adopting a policy of replacing any of the failed 4,000K light bulbs with the warmer alternatives, because we have seen, Cambridge was one of the earlier adopters, I think, of this technology, much to our credit, and it's saved us a bundle of money. And overall, I think it's been, a very successful program. But the cities that followed us have tended, in many cases, Chicago, for instance, to install 3,000, even 2,500. So I don't think the memo actually answers the question posed, which is, if one of these bulb fails, can we have a policy that will just start putting in the lower, I want to call them watt, but they're not watt, I guess they're kelvins. And then I guess the other question is, I know they have really long lives. How long would we have to wait for the bulbs to reach their natural lifespan so that we could replace them if we wanted to?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The LED lights typically will last almost 20 years. That's and further on, where we reduce the intensity and we're dropping them down to 70% and 35%, that's going to increase the life even longer. So I didn't address the replacement of it. The only time we've had to replace an LED light is when it gets knocked down from an accident, and that's typically out of the 12 to 15 knockdowns we have a year. 2 or 3 of them are the higher street lights, and the rest of them are the lower street lights. Pedestrian scale, which are typically, which are all between 3,000 and 3,500. When we, back in 2014, when we did the installation, we ordered 24 or so of each 3 types for replacements, and we haven't even exhausted those yet. Where we do reduce the intensity at night, you do get the effect that the color is a little bit, on the lower side. It's not, but you do get that effect. So we really didn't address the replacement. I don't think we'll be seeing a replacement in quite a few years.
Yeah. Well, not in my lifetime, probably. So, I guess I understand that it perhaps would have been helpful just to say that in the memo, because the question asked was, are we going to do this? And people still ask us. So I'm not, I don't know whether the answer will satisfy the people who feel most strongly that the light that we've chosen is too harsh, too blue. But I do think that encouraging people to take advantage of the opportunity to have lights that are really bothering them on their own property, screened and dimmed, would be good and redirected. It doesn't help those who think that all exposure to the blue light is detrimental to health. But it doesn't sound as though we're going to take out all of the bulbs while they still have life in them. Thank you.
Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, just to clarify, the temperature is determined by the fixture or by the bulb or both?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's the actual LED lamp within. So there's a driver within the fixture which drives the LED, and that's what determines the color.
So we could, in theory, replace the bulbs in the existing streetlights to get a lower temperature?
You would have to change the whole fixture because they're built. They're designed and built as a fixture. You could change the driver, but you couldn't change the actual lamp within the fixture.
Okay, so how much would it cost to replace it?
The 3 types of fixtures that we've had out, the 3 major types of fixtures run anywhere from $500 to $800 a piece.
Okay.
And there's 5, with 5,000, and that's just the Cobra Head style streetlights, not including installation.
Okay, and you did dim the one near my house, and thank you for that. And as you indicated, that doesn't change the temperature, though. That just reduces the amount of light,
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it lessens the effect, yes, yeah.
And would there be if we did decide to replace some of them, would there be a concern about having some at 4,000 and some at 3,000 on the same street or in the same area?
I think that would be minimal, but you would see a difference, yes.
But it wouldn't be a concern necessarily?
I don't think so, no.
So I guess I would still like us to adopt a policy that says we will replace them with a lower temperature over time. I mean, I understand it's going to take us a while to work through the ones we already have on hand. But at some point, we're going to run out of those. And then we have to make some decisions. And if it's not an issue to use a lower temperature, then why not have that be our policy?
I'm sure we could, yes. Yeah. As they go, we could change them out. So any further, as we purchase the same type of fixture, exchange out failed ones, as we run out of our stock, we could go to the 3,000.
Okay. So I guess, I don't know, do we need to do it on a policy order, or how do we sort of codify that so that we can say to folks that that is the official policy now?
Mr. Manager?
I would assume you could put a policy order in, and we would, say that from moving forward, we're fine with it, and that's what the council wants, and that's what they feel the residents want. From our point of view, Steve, there doesn't seem to be an issue. So we could start that process as the bulbs go.
Thank you. That sounds great. And just to be clear, I mean, we do have concerns from the American Medical Association and other organizations that 4,000 is not really ideal. So, and again, that's not a criticism. Obviously, we went first, and that was what was on the table, and we did what we did. But I do appreciate going forward that we can start to lower that. Thank you.
Councilor Carlone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick addition to what both the council and the vice mayor said. We are going to be redeveloping Alewife in the next 20 years. There'll be many more streets, and I'm assuming we're going to get rid of some of the industrial-like feeling on those streets. So that would be the perfect place to begin the changeover. And even in North Point, there's going to be, I realize that's ongoing, but there's going to be new streets as they expand there. So it would seem logical to begin the shift where it is doable. One quick question through you, Mr. Mayor. Is it less electricity at 3,000 Kelvin, or is it the equivalent as 4,000 Kelvin?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, at the time, 4,000 was the most energy efficient.
I see.
As they went to 3,000, it wouldn't be as efficient, but as technology moved, it's close, but I think it's very close actually right now. And the push is going to the 3,000, and it is roughly the same.
Okay. I was hoping it was that much more efficient, and then we could say for efficiency purposes. Okay, well, maybe in 5 years. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Roll call. Oh, we don't need it. On adoption, on placing on file, all those in favor say aye, those opposed nay. The ayes have it. We now move to Charter Right number 5, a communication transmitted from Louis A. DePasquale, City Manager, relative to a waiting report item number 18-142, regarding a report on efforts to educate cyclists about riding safely and sharing the road, especially at intersections. Councilor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to the manager and staff. I appreciate the list. I have to say I regularly question the efficiency of our bike safety efforts. So my foundational question is, do we think this is actually working and that these efforts are leading to the sort of safe bike riding and awareness that we would like to have.
Ms. Root?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Kelly, we feel that we are hitting just about every different vehicle that we can to try to reach out to folks. And could we really gauge effectiveness? It's very challenging to be able to do that because there's always a time lag between when you go ahead with an educational effort and when it manifests any kind of impact. Plus, thinking about what we as a city, as a relatively small city in our region, can do when people who are riding bicycles are coming from all of our surrounding cities. So we're not a closed system. And it's really hard to educate every single person who might be bicycling in Cambridge, although we do obviously things that are visible outside, like the Hubway ads are visible to everybody, and we do have our workshops open not just to Cambridge residents, but also to those who work here or go to school here. I would say probably the most effective pieces, I believe, and this takes a while to manifest, is the fact that we are reaching out to people, to Cambridge residents, especially when they're young. And there's a lot of literature on the fact that what we learn in our childhood and our youth are things that stick much better than what we learn as adults. So we are reaching out to, in the Cambridge public school system, as well as a little bit beyond. We're reaching out to every second and sixth grader through the Safe Routes to School program. Fourth and fifth grades get educated in a similar curriculum through the Cycle Kids program. And then when people reach high school, we continue to have workshops with them. We have pizza lunches to get people to come. Everybody who is in the mayor's summer youth employment program has to do a bike safety workshop through their orientation. And then the interns, who work with us, so Team CTD, those who work with the Department of Public Works, the Team Green Sense, and the Arts Council, Cambridge Arts Youth, are all going through an additional bike safety workshop. And then they, in turn, are outreach workers who are reaching out to the broader community to educate folks about bike safety. So I think that would hope, and if the research is accurate, the people we are reaching out to right now in their childhood and in their youth will actually mature to be much more responsible bicyclists than the rest of us are right now, who are trying to learn this as we go. I would say the other most significant piece in this outreach effort is the fact that we have started working with much more closely in collaboration with the bike advocacy community. So Boston Cyclists Union, Livable Streets Alliance, also Walk Boston, around educating folks who are members of their organization. So it's cyclists teaching other cyclists and not just having it be a message from somebody who like a member of the police or somebody who's walking or in car trying to provide a message. So it's part of the same community and internal messaging, which you can see now sometimes if you go to the bike safety Facebook group. There are times where the members are talking to each other about safety, which I think is probably the most profound way for people to influence behavior change, is when that same peer group is talking to each other. And I know some of you have been part of that group and engaging in those conversations. So Do I have empirical evidence that this is effective? No. But are all the science, are we doing everything we can, and are the signs pointing in the right direction? I would say yes. And we will continue, if there are other ideas of how we can do things better, we are absolutely happy to take those and run with them as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it was a long list of things you do. I have taken a very, very unscientific approach to figuring out how well cyclists manage their own safety, and that's sort of who runs the red light that I stop for. And roughly 83%, and again, it's unscientific, but I guess I'm pretty close, of people will run a red light if there's no crossing vehicular traffic. They may stop, but they may not. And that doesn't count people without lights. That doesn't count people with bags on their handlebars. It doesn't count people going the wrong way. That doesn't count people riding on the sidewalk. And all of that stuff is dangerous behavior, not just for other people on the road, but also, and often especially, for the cyclists themselves. So, I would argue that we are not nearly where we should be or we could be, and we've had 250 attendees in the workshops. I have not found the public service announcements on the Blue Bike station about the trucks. That's sort of a big blob of a picture. It does not really convey the sense of danger that I feel people should feel when they're around a big truck, whether they're a pedestrian or a cyclist, or even, honestly, a car. Big trucks are really, really dangerous. I have not been able to find any videos that we've put together that are generally available and pushed out on the public, because a lot of people learn what they need to learn through videos, especially things like this. So we could have, and I know we have a TV station, we could have videos put together through them that get shown, for example, at the local theaters. They have pictures of some guy talking to his mom at the Somerville Theater, which is amusing but not particularly beneficial. I think we're leaving an awful lot on the table here, and the challenge is this isn't sort of a hypothetical harm. It's a real harm. It's a harm for cyclists. It's a harm for other people on the road, and I think it's going to get infinitely worse in the immediate future when we start seeing a lot of other things that aren't quite bikes, whether they're electric skateboards or scooters. I know Brookline's doing their test scooter program. I don't know where we are in that, but people certainly have their own private ones. I know that when we start talking about e-bikes, the speed on those is vastly greater than a traditional road bike. So there's a lot of stuff here, and I think that we honestly are not doing what needs to be done to make sure that everyone understands their rights, but also their responsibilities and the beneficial impacts on them of behaving in a safe and responsible manner.
So, Councillor, I hear you on some of these issues. I just wanted to add one thing in response to the question about videos. The city has a contract with CCTV, and CDD and the traffic department have worked together to work with CCTV and create a series of videos that talk about speed limits, bike lanes, pedestrian lights, bus lanes, our bike workshops, Vision Zero, street code, and we are on target. We're on track to create some additional series this spring, specifically focused on how to use streets safely and responsibly. That's not listed here because this council order was particularly about safety around large trucks, and we hadn't yet made videos related to that. But we do have, that is something that we are intending to do for this coming year, as well as things like how to be alert in the door zone. So those are available. We can certainly publicize those more through our social media channels and such. But I just wanted to make sure that folks know that that is something that is available.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you, through you. Well, I appreciate all these efforts. I'm a little frustrated by the direction that this debate or whatever discussion has taken tonight, because to me it's dangerously close to putting the burden for safety on the most vulnerable users. And in my opinion, the burden for safely operating with large trucks is squarely on the operator of the large trucks. I attended the Urban Freight Forum. I thought that was a great start to looking at the very complex issues about the movement of large trucks around the city. And, you know, the video that shows, you know, the blind spots and the turning radius should put the fear of God into any truck operator. I don't think there were that many truck operators in the audience, but everybody else in the audience certainly knows. I would also note that at least 2 of the victims of relatively recent fatal crashes were widely known to be very experienced and very cautious and very safe cyclists who no doubt knew full well the danger that large trucks posed to them and were still swept under the wheels and crushed. The solution for that is protected bike lanes, which hopefully in a couple of weeks we will be voting on. And the state, at the State House on Thursday morning, there are hearings to start talking about the multiple bills that are before them that also include the requirement for truck side guards, better mirrors, safe passing distances, a whole array of things that will protect vulnerable users. And I know that Joe Barr is planning to attend, and other members of our staff may be planning to attend to testify in those. So, you know, obviously, we all have a responsibility to try to keep each other safe, but I'm not comfortable with talking about how the additional road users who are operating non-motorized or, you know, lightly motorized light vehicles are making their streets unsafe. What makes our streets unsafe are the cars and trucks, and our culture has just so internalized that is the way that we are entitled to move around the streets, and we are entitled to put others at risk. And it just really makes me angry to hear this continued to come in. So yes, we all need to respect each other and to try to follow all of the laws as much as we can. But please, if you're operating a truck, watch out. Thank you.
Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you, I just want to second that. Paula Shirago is a personal friend of mine, and so it is very disturbing to me that we continue to lose friends and residents to unsafe trucks on our roads. And I honestly don't understand why we're not doing more about that. We have the technology. I was test driving a Chevy Bolt yesterday, and if you're coming up on an obstacle and you're not slowing down fast enough, it will hit the brakes for you. Why are we not requiring that technology on all of our trucks? I also want to point out that there's no agreement among people in the cycling community that running red lights is an unsafe practice. In fact, when you're standing next to a truck waiting for the light, it may well be the safest thing to do if there's no cross traffic to cross ahead of the light turning green for the truck so that you can avoid the turning movement. So, you know, I think there's a lot that we still need to do, and I completely agree with the Vice Mayor. Even our laws and traffic regulations encode the primacy of cars, and even the notion that bicycles should behave the exact same way and should stop on red lights in the same way is essentially saying, you know, they're just funny looking cars, which is not at all the case. So I do think we need to take this conversation in a different direction, where we are making the heavy vehicles safe and we reduce the number of them on our roads as much as possible. Every time that I drive through Davis Square, which I know is not in Cambridge, but I just can't believe that cars are allowed to drive through there. It just doesn't make any sense to me. You know, that should be a pedestrian only area. And I think the same is true for Harvard Square in Cambridge. So we really need to start thinking about how we change the way that we use our roads, how we change the laws, and how we change the vehicles that operate on them so that we can all be safer.
Okay. Nothing further? I'm placing the matter on file. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We move to charter rate number 6, that the city manager direct the appropriate city staff to examine the need and possibility of neighborhood preference in Cambridge in the short and long terms. Councilor Carlone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you know, we've refined this policy order and resubmitted it.
So we can place this on file and then
Yes,
just
please.
take up the...
Thank you.
On placing on file, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to applications and petitions. Pleasure of the council. Question comes on adopting, Councilor Carlone.
I was just going to call out number 1, please.
Okay. And the question on number 2 comes to referring to the Ordinance Committee and Planning Board for a hearing and report. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We go back to number 1. An application was received from Harvard Square Business Association requesting permission for 38 temporary banners on poles in Harvard Square announcing welcome to historic Harvard Square on May 1st, 2019 through April 1st, 2020. Councilor Carlone.
I obviously, for banners of celebration in the city. I just wanted to question temporary banners for 11 months. That seems like a major oxymoron, and it's the same banners throughout that were up last year. Maybe that's not so terrible. But I don't know the rules. Maybe the rules are temporary as anything less than a year. That's what I read into this, but something doesn't seem right there. And I just call that out to my fellow councilors. I don't want to hurt Harvard Square, but, you know, it just seems very odd.
I guess when you're 300 plus years old, like Harvard Square is 11 months is temporary. But
yes, I agree.
Anything further? On adoption. Oh, yeah, no, yes, no?
Well,
Vice Mayor?
I guess I would just note that the artwork appears to be an image of the kiosk, which will probably be somewhat under construction for part of this period, but it is iconic for Harvard Square. But it won't be. It will be perhaps the last time the banners have a picture of the newsstand as the kiosk, because it won't be a newsstand.
All right, on adoption. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Now move to communications. On a motion by Councilor Simmons to bring forward communications 1 through 14 and place on file. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We move on to resolutions. On a motion by Councilor Simmons to bring forward resolutions 1, 2, and 3, making unanimous upon adoption. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to policy orders and resolutions list. On a motion by Vice Mayor Devereaux to bring policy orders before us for discussion and adoption. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Pleasure of the council.
Number 12.
Councilor Simmons has number 12. Councilor Mallon.
Number 2, 3, and 5, please.
Councilor Carlone.
Number 11.
Pleasure of the council. Councilor Zondervan.
Number 6, please.
Number what? 6.
6.
I thought you said 50. I was about to lose my mind. Pleasure of the council. On adoption of the balance, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We move back to policy order number 2, that the city manager confer with the Community Development Department, Economic Development Department, and the Cambridge Arts Council to designate a staff member in the Economic Development Department as an arts liaison. This was filed by Councilor Mallon and myself. Councilor Mallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I suspend the rules to take policy orders 2 and 3 together?
On suspension, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Policy order number 3, that the city manager is requested to confer with the License Commission, Cambridge Arts Council, and IT Department to create a dedicated, comprehensive, arts-friendly licensing webpage. This was filed by Councilor Mallon and myself. Councilor Mallon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. At the last Arts Task Force meeting, which was focused on the issues and challenges that artists, arts, music, events organizers, and arts organizations face with our current permitting system and navigating city services and departments as a whole, we really tried to identify where gaps exist so that they could be addressed. So joining us was Nicole Marati Ferrer from the License Commission and Pardees Safari from Economic Development, just to talk to us about these challenges and what roles their departments could play in addressing them. So if you're a business and you want to set up shop, you connect with the local business association and the economic development department, and then they connect you through licensing, inspectional services, DPW, et cetera. But when you're an arts organization or an arts organizer, you don't automatically think to connect with the business association, so you're really lacking that single point of contact in the city to help you navigate. So that's kind of where we got to at the Arts Task Force meeting. We actually have a current situation right now in Central Square where there's a black box theater that's trying to open up on Green Street and has been trying to overcome a number of hurdles from ISD and licensing, and finally got connected with the CSBA too late and may give up and move their location to Arlington or Somerville, where it might be easier for get them to set up shop. And so this is the type of business we really want to encourage in our cultural district, and this is not a story that we want to hear. So we also discussed the current licensing website and how it's not arts friendly and doesn't provide any interdepartmental connectivity. So Austin, Texas, which does a ton of musical events, has a great one-stop shop website that walks artists and organizations through a process on how to set up your organization or event and provides helpful links to other departments that you need. So creating that interdepartmental connectivity, as well as setting a tone through the website that Cambridge is open for business for arts and we are arts friendly. Those seem to be the keys to creating success in this area. As Kelly Sherman, visual artist here in Cambridge and task force member, wrote in earlier in support of this order, as currently configured, the city's licensing online communications unintentionally acts as an active deterrent to creative cultural producers. A dedicated arts-friendly licensing webpage would encourage creative producers to not only choose Cambridge as the site of their creative works, but to properly license them. So as a result of the Arts Task Force meeting and with the backing of the members, we submitted 2 policy orders that will seek to address those challenges. So policy order number 2, that the city designate someone at EDD to be a single point of contact for arts organizations and help navigate the city departments and bureaucracy. And policy number 3 asks the city to create a dedicated and comprehensive page on the License Commission website, which is arts-friendly, easy to navigate, regularly updated and maintained, and provides a calendar of already permitted arts events to avoid overlap and conflict, and creates that highly visible interdepartmental connections to serve as a one-stop shop for developing arts and cultural events and spaces. So I hope that my colleagues can join me and the task force in asking the city manager and the departments to look into these 2 solutions to address current challenges for artists and arts organizations here in Cambridge. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any further comment? Councilor Zondervan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly in full support. I just wanted to offer a small correction because the economic development is actually a division within the community development department. So where it says economic development department, it should really say economic development division.
On the amendment, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. Councilor Mallon, thank you again for your leadership. There's been many recommendations and orders that have come out of the work that you're doing on the Arts Task Force, and really grateful for that. Thank you. That was on policy order number 2 as amended. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. On policy order number 3, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to policy order number 5, that the city manager confer with the mayor's office, Commission on Persons with Disabilities, and Police Department to increase accessibility to the deaf community by hiring American Sign Language interpreters and using apps such as Language Line Solutions to communicate with the deaf community in their first language. Filed by Councilor Mallon, Councilor Kelly, and Councilor Toomey. Councilor Mallon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this policy order seeks to address some gaps in communicating with our deaf community. So first, at many press conferences and other communities, particularly in public safety, where police are trying to communicate a public safety issue, there's an American Sign Language or ASL interpreter. For the deaf community, ASL is their first language, and we should be striving to be inclusive when relaying information, particularly as it relates to public safety. Additionally, the City of San Francisco has recently started using an app called Language Line Solutions, where deaf victims, witnesses, or perpetrators of a crime can connect with them via a video chatting app on their phones, and it connects them right to an ASL interpreter and bringing them on the crime scene directly, and most importantly, in their first language. So these two supports, the ASL interpreter and an app, can help our deaf community be better able to interact with public safety officials and will serve to ensure that we continue to make improvements to be the inclusive city that we strive to be.
Pleasure of the council. On adoption, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to policy order number 6. That a roundtable meeting be scheduled for Tuesday, April 9th, 2019 at 5:30 p.m. in the Sullivan Chamber, City Hall, for the purpose of discussing the affordable housing zoning overlay proposal. This was filed by myself, pulled by Councilor Zondervan. I will yield to you, Councilor Zondervan, to hear your question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly, I look forward to discussions on the overlay. I guess my question is if we could get some more clarity on what exactly we will be discussing, because unfortunately so far the conversation has been, there's been a lot of emotion but not a lot of concrete detail as to what the overlay would entail. So it would just be helpful to understand a little bit.
So the hope is that at the next Housing Committee meeting we will have something a little more concrete to look at. And I felt it was important for us to be able to have a roundtable conversation where if we're going to have a 2-hour meeting and the majority of that is taken up by a presentation and public comment, that there needs to be a time for the council to be able to sit and talk amongst ourselves. It's a public meeting. It will be open to the public. The policy order calls for it to be televised, but there will be no public comment. I just think that we need an opportunity to sit and dissect what's going to be presented to us at that meeting. I'm getting it on the calendar as soon as I can because the calendars are filling up. So really nothing more than that. Councilor Zondervan, you still have the floor.
Oh, thank you. I guess I certainly understand that, and it makes a lot of sense to me. I guess I would just encourage us to try to structure that meeting as much as we can around specific ideas or elements of the proposal, so that we can be as productive as possible.
Well, I'm hopeful that we will get some more concrete information on the 28th, and we have from the 28th to the 9th for people to councilors to formulate their questions. And so I hope and expect that we will all come prepared and ready to go. I've got Councilor Carlone and then the Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think what I've been told is we're going to hear more of a conceptual approach, hopefully greater information than that. But if community development is still talking about form-based zoning, which I know intimately, it's a lot of work. And it is the right way to go to get rid of many of the questions that neighborhood folks have. I would imagine that would take months, not weeks. So we'll see what we have. But if they're still continuing on that direction, this will be quite a long-term discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
And I'm just clarifying that it's not just the 9 of us, that the staff from CDD are there.
Correct.
But not necessarily the Affordable Housing Trust and all of the others who have been at the table.
I have not thought that far along. Yeah, so the appropriate staff will be there from the city. I think I will invite other people if I feel they're going to be helpful to the conversation. But.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to, if there is anything concrete that's not just conceptual, I'd like to have the people who can really answer the detailed questions, because that's the information that we haven't had any real discussions about what it is we're discussing, other than that we're all support affordable housing.
Right. Councilor Mellon?
I would have to agree with Councilor Carlone that I'm not sure about the timing on this, and I'm going to exercise my charter right to put this into the next meeting and hope that people can just put a hold on their calendars. I think this does warrant some more discussion about timing based on what happens this week at the meeting. So I'm going to exercise my charter right.
All right. We now move to policy order number 11, that the city manager is requested to direct the appropriate city staff to examine the need and possibility of implementing the pilot displacement preference program in Cambridge, especially when new housing is constructed in an existing neighborhood where displacement is occurring. This is filed by Councilor Carlone, Councilor Zondervan, myself, and Councilor Siddiqui. Councilor Carlone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is fundamentally the same policy order as last week, with refinements and updates cited by some of the co-sponsors. And basically, I won't go through the whole dialogue I gave last week, but basically what it says is that it's difficult for people to move from their neighborhood, even into a nice unit, if it is distant from community services and specifically their own area. And when there is a building, Mass and Main, that will have as many as 50 units in a neighborhood where displacement is occurring, the city should consider emphasizing or focusing on the people in that neighborhood who are being displaced or have been displaced to move back into their neighborhood. That's all it is. Now, Boston has this, and it's only starting up. It's still a case study, and that's all we're asking for here. But Boston has it because they're such a big city. But in truth, most of the people who have support by Cambridge Housing Authority don't live in Cambridge, or many of them can't live in Cambridge. And in fact, they're in greater Boston. And all this is saying is we should be on an equal foot with Boston, and I would assume Somerville and maybe Brookline, that it's looked at in a regional way. And there are many studies on the psychology, especially if you're older, if you're moved out of your neighborhood. And quite frankly, Alewife doesn't have any social infrastructure to speak of. And many of the people who have gone there have said they miss their squares. So that's really what this is all about. And it's not demanding it, it's saying look into it and see what we can do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Pleasure to council. On adoption, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now move to policy order number 12, that the city manager is requested to double the annual funding from the fiscal year 19 adopted budget over the next 3 to 5 years to reach a combined total minimum of $30 million per year, plus any additional use of free cash in the areas of affordable housing construction, tree canopy, preschool enrollment, scholarships/space, Central Square revitalization, and cultural arts district, and the arts in general. Filed by Councilor Carlone, Councilor Zondervan, myself, Councilor Siddiqui, pulled by Councilor Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I usually go to the motion maker
I
first.
was going to say I'll yield to the motion makers to speak to their motion, and then I will take the floor.
Councilor Carlone.
Thank you, Councilor and Mr. Mayor. We have all discussed and even passed a policy order last year, or was it last term now, I don't recall, asking for $20 million in affordable housing. And each of us have spoken about areas that, in addition to housing, that concerns us. Councilor Mallon tonight talked about the Arts Council. The public talked about Central Square. These are all issues, and I'm sure we could add others. So Councilor Zondervan and I met with the manager 4 times, I think, but maybe it's 5. And I know you all have as well. And we asked for exactly what we've talked about before, $20 million in affordable housing, increasing the funding, doubling pre-K, and all the things that we talked about. And through a lengthy series of discussions, including at the conference in Washington, a casual lunch get-together, we came to a point where the manager said, I can live with this and we can keep increasing it every year. Now, this order says within 3 to 5 years. My goal is 3 years, not 5 years. So I'll leave it like that. I know Councilor Zondervan will also want to say something, but I now yield to Councilor.
Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you. First of all, there's also a small typo in this one. In the 4th, whereas it says, and the certified net free, that should say certified net free cash. So as Councilor Carlone indicated, this was the result of some very involved discussions with the city manager, and I think we came to a very good place. I want to point out a couple of things. One, that because of the way free cash works, it's a little bit tricky because the manager does not want to commit annual spending from free cash, which makes sense because then it would just be part of the budget. So this 30 million floor is really not including any free cash that the manager could still come forward and appropriate or ask for appropriation for any of these priority areas. So if we do the calculation and we say, well, this is not quite 20 million additional for affordable housing, that's because there might be free cash appropriations in addition to this that could well take us beyond that 20 million. Also, the goal would be to get to this 30 million in 3 to 5 years, and as Councilor Carlone indicated, the sooner the better. But it is an ongoing process, and we would expect to see progress along the way. So we will be able to see the budgets coming up to make sure that it is indeed heading in the right direction. And then once we do secure a level of funding for affordable housing construction that I think we're all comfortable with, I would like us to also put some attention on subsidizing directly rent and mortgage for low-income residents to protect them from displacement and to help keep them where they are. And I know that's a different discussion, but we really need to have all 3 pieces in place for our housing policy, affordable housing construction, tenant protections, and then direct subsidies to keep people in their existing housing. So I hope that we can start to shift the conversation in that direction as well.
Councilor Siddiqui.
Thank you. Through you to my colleagues. I've had probably 10 conversations with the city manager on this as well, and figuring out a way to prioritize a lot of these items that all of us have been collectively advocating for many months. On the Councilor Zanderman's point about funding and tenant protections. We're having those conversations in the task force. There's a lot of unfortunate limitations in what we can do with public money due to anti-aid amendment, but we are working on that. And I think, it does take many of us councilors to bring this issue as many times as we can to the city manager. And I'm glad that each of us has in the last year. I think we can get to a good place. I still don't think it's enough, but that's a whole other issue. But I think each of us collectively pushing on this will get us to a good place.
Thank you. And I would just say real quick, Councillor, I would be a little careful of putting out there that we're going to look at directly subsidizing people's rents. I just don't know that that's legal. And so I don't want people to, before we have a legal opinion on that, which I think we'll come back and say we can't, I don't want people getting too excited about that. Can you go to Councillor Mallon, or do you want to come, Councillor Simmons?
I'll yield. Go ahead.
Yield. Councillor Mallon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I was thrilled to see a couple of my really pet items on this list of really high priorities: the Central Square revitalization, the Cultural Arts District, and arts in general. So thank you for including those really important things that are near and dear to my heart. I have been working since last February on the Central Square Business Improvement District, and that is getting to a very good place where I feel like we are almost there, and we should have a petition in front of us very soon. The city has, and the city manager and David Kale have been incredibly helpful and very, very supportive of this process, both in making sure that the funding is right, and the city is putting forth the amount of funding they need to, so that the other property owners are actually following suit, and we can get a really strong business improvement district here in Central Square. It's something that we've been needing for a long time. We had a successful month in November, and I think everyone's really, where we had a pilot, and I think everyone's really excited about bringing that back. And as part of that project and as part of that package, we will have some significant funding for the cultural district, which is really exciting because, as someone mentioned earlier, we've had a cultural district for a while, and it has never been funded. The other thing is, as many people have mentioned before, people have had meetings with the city manager, and I've had a number of meetings with the city manager and Ms. Peterson around significantly increasing our arts funding through the fiscal year 20 budget, and waiting until the fall to certify our free cash to really figure that out. One of the recommendations out of the arts task force is going to be having a committee come together and talk about how to spend that additional money and where those dollars should go. That's not something I feel like I should do or the council should do. This task force has been working so well together and really thinking holistically around the city. And I'm excited, not excited for the task force to end, but I think the recommendations that come out of it and the budget that will come forward and what the city manager has said he would support this really important thing with, I think people are going to be excited about. So again, thank you for including these really important things. I'm appreciative that to see them on this list with all the other things on that as a council we are working on together. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Simmons?
Well, thank you. So I did read the order, and it did bring in a lot of different aspects and areas that I know the entire council has been working on, and so it shows that there's a great deal of collegiality going on in the council, and I'm very happy about that. I do have some concerns about one of the issues that you brought up earlier about what we can and cannot fund. And I think what the order will do once passed will allow the city manager to have the opportunity to look into it, and if we can't reach a particular goal, we'll find another way to maybe get to where we want to do, maybe not as direct as this may have been written. The only thing I just wanted to add is an amendment, and I want to thank my co-sponsors for it. If the deputy clerk wants to come get a copy of it, and it's written as follows. is that at least 20 million of this annual total be appropriated for affordable housing development as required by the April 23, 2018 policy order that called for an additional 20 million per year for the purpose over the next 5 years, which was adopted by the full city council. And then it picks up from where to the other further orders. And the only reason why I specify that is that because the council, and it was said in some of the earlier conversations, this council has voted on a couple of times that they wanted the 20 million per year for a 5-year period. I don't want to get away from that. We know that that affordable housing is clearly the interest of a great number of people. We have voted on this. We've talked about this a little while. This is just one of many tools that we're going to be utilizing to get ourselves to building, supporting, and sustaining as much affordable housing as we can, with that goal of being able to maintain and sustain economic diversity. So I offer with the support of my colleagues this amendment, and I hope that it will stand and go forward with the order as amended.
Discussion? Councilor Zondervan? Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Councilor Simmons for bringing this forward. I think at one level, it's quite easy to agree because that's what will happen. That at least 20 million of by the time we get to 30 million would be for affordable housing. The only thing that I think gets a little bit complicated is with the free cash situation, because again, the 30 million is not including any free cash appropriations that the city manager wants to bring forward. So I don't know exactly how that factors into it, but at least for the next couple of years, I think we would get to the 20 million with free cash, and then by the time we're 3 to 5 years out, we would be at 20 million just in the budget, if that makes any sense. So I think that's the only thing that makes it a little bit complicated, which is why we didn't want to be that prescriptive. But the understanding is that the vast majority of that funding, certainly well over 20 million by the time we get to 30, would be affordable housing. And again, this 30 million figure is the minimum, it's not the maximum. So what we're asking for and what the city manager would agree to is that we would be spending at least that much, not at most that much.
Councilor Carlin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to say this is the policy order from last April, and of course it wasn't incorporated into the budget. The manager at the State of the City presentation said he was going to add $1 million to the affordable housing budget, 1 million. And that's when a number of us went to speak to him. This says $20 million per year in affordable housing. And we brought this up, and manager said there's no way that can happen. Now, we can pass it again, just like we did last time, and led to nothing. And what we tried to do is negotiate as hard as we could. We brought up exactly what this old policy order said. I guess that's up to the manager, and after Councilor Toomey, do I want 20 million a year? Absolutely. As I've said before, that's why I ran for council, one of the major reasons. We had no money in the city budget 6 years ago. It was all the subtax, the surtax of the Cambridge Preservation Act, and any money we have has been added. This would bring it up to $10 million a year, and hopefully the next year be another 5 and another 5, if not more. But I mean, we can do do this again, but I can tell you we ask the manager about this, and please do, you will see his reaction, and he will tell you why personally.
Well, let me jump in for a second because, since I've met with the manager too. I think we're all saying that we met with the manager specifically around this 20 million. And I think the manager's come a long way. I think when this was originally passed a year ago, it was no, that's not going to happen. And that's not the indication I'm getting from him now. I'm not sure it's going to come from free cash. In fact, I probably think it might not, or at least certainly not all of it, because I think the manager is reluctant to spend that free cash, but it might come from other ways, including an increase in permitting fees. And we're about to get, when we look at the taxes that we're going to get from recreational marijuana and from short-term rentals, there's going to be millions and millions and millions of dollars flowing into the city from those taxes. If we were to allocate 1% of that to affordable housing from the two of those sources, we're going to get pretty close to that. And so I don't think, I would never say never, Councilor Carlone. I think the manager has moved on this.
This says per year, Mr. Mayor.
Absolutely. And I think I am more optimistic than I was even 6 months ago with conversations with him. But I certainly, to Councilor Simmons' amendment, I was concerned, and I didn't think of this at the time until Councilor Simmons mentioned it to me, that I want to make sure that this motion, that the Policy Order 12, with the 30 million, does not mean at the expense of the 20 million that we've been talking about for a long time. And so I would be concerned that if we didn't insert something reaffirming our commitment to the 20 million, that that money can be divided up, that 30 million that we're asking for could be divided up in a number of ways. So I actually see it as additional to what we were talking about. So I think it's important to say we're reaffirming our commitment to that 20 million a year, and we'll have to haggle it out with him about whether or not we get it. But I think we need to be consistent.
May I just add,
Councilor Simmons.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. As we've all stated earlier, we've had our different conversations with our city manager, and so we just put this before him. He is our commander-in-chief, if you will, and allow him to work it through. This council has said on more than one occasion, this is what we wanted. So we are just restating it here, and I would respectfully ask that our colleagues stand together, asking the city manager for this allocation in the context of the order that you have just presented.
Thank you. Councilor Siddiqui?
And I will add that I think the city manager has, said in different ways why, maybe to each of us, why the 20 million, this won't work or that, but I think it's important that he say it publicly about what he's thinking and how he's thinking about it. And so there has not been an official response. We may have all talked to him and he may have said something, but there's a reason we put these orders in, and so I think it merits a collective response since we've asked for it.
I have Vice Mayor Devereaux and then Councilor Zondervan.
Well, I want to thank all of those who have been meeting with the manager and lobbying for this, so I support it. In terms of other sources of revenue, you mentioned cannabis and short-term rentals, I think. The other thing is, I think we have a new incentive zoning study underway to look at that fee. There was an announcement this morning that over at Cambridge Crossing, there is 900,000 square feet of construction to build big buildings that will be the future home of Sanofi, 900,000 square feet. They're expecting to bring in about 2,700 workers, and I imagine some of those workers are going to want to live in Cambridge. So that's creating, this is not obviously a surprise to anybody, but I just think, the incentive zoning is a major contributor, although it wasn't until we raised the rate a few years ago. And I'm curious to see what that study will tell us that the rate should be increased to, because that also contributes to the Affordable Housing Trust and helps with all of the problems that all of this great growth brings, along with the benefits. Thank you.
Yeah, even at $15, 900,000 square feet is $13,500,000 that building alone will bring in for affordable housing. Councilor Zondervan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and we certainly did speak with the manager about that, about those alternative sources of funding as well. He's not ready to put a number on it because we don't know what that number is going to be. And I guess I would like us to be really clear about what we're asking. If what we're asking is that by the time we get to 30 million, at least 20 million of that goes to affordable housing, I think that's easy. And we could even...
We're over that.
Right. Then we could even integrate that into the existing order. I don't think we necessarily need an additional order to accomplish that. So as long as we're just really clear about what we're asking, because if we're asking the manager to go to 20 million a year affordable housing, starting in the next fiscal year, then it does, again, he will have to do some of that through free cash, which he is willing to do. It just doesn't fall under this 30 million. So that's why it is a little bit complicated.
Councilor Carl.
I think the amendment is fine if we say what we just discussed, that from free cash, from future taxes on marijuana, Airbnb, greater funding from commercial development. If we don't say it, it's going to be the same situation as last year. I mean, he announced $1 million more, not $20 million more in affordable housing at the State of the City event. And I don't want it to hold up the other portion that there was some general agreement. I think we'll get there. I want to get there, but it's not what he was discussing. And I'm all for him coming if it means I should charter write this so that we all can talk individually. That's fine with me. I just don't want to mess up. Maybe it's not sufficient. I was disappointed, but it's not $1 million more. It's over $5 million more, actually over $6 more this year than the previous year. And that's insufficient, I agree. We can talk about this all day. But I would just like to modify the new order and specify where those monies could come from.
Councilor Simmons.
Mr. Chair, thank you. As I said earlier, this order is a blueprint. It is the compilation of ideas of many individuals, either directly or indirectly. I'm just adding an amendment that asserts something that this council has voted for previously. And I think this, if this goes before the city manager, he'll have the opportunity, he'll make the opportunity, we can request the opportunity that he sits, it can go to committee and be discussed, there's a number of different places that this could be vetted at a round table or in a committee meeting. I would respectfully ask that my colleagues adopt the order. The city manager will then come back to us, as he always does, with a report as to what he sees as viable, what he doesn't see as viable, what can happen when and how. This is how we usually do our business, talking to the city manager, and I would respectfully ask my colleagues' support for it.
Sorry,
Mr. Mayor.
a little. Councilor Tim.
I yield the floor.
Councilor Tim.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It seems that Christmas has come early, not in December anymore, but in March. I'm really a little bit confused on how this money, these are all great causes. We have affordable housing construction, tree canopy, preschool enrollment, scholarship space, Central Square revitalization, cultural arts district, and the arts in general. I can add about 20 more to this list myself. And how is this, so there's 5 areas we're looking, minimum of $30 million. Is each one of the categories going to get $6 million each? How is this going to be decided? And I just think we're raising a lot of expectations among the public. I think it's fine. I think some of us should schedule meetings also with the city manager and say, I want the $20 million every year for affordable housing, period. Period. Because that is the most pressing issue that I am dealing with my constituents. So I have no problem taking the money out of free cash, wherever it comes. I really don't care. So I just don't see how, and maybe Councilor Collins is correct, that maybe it should be charter written so that people have an opportunity, but I just don't see how you come up with these 5 categories, and they're all great. And the tree canopy, I would spend whatever it costs to replace every tree that's been taken down and plant even more for that. And if that costs another $20 million for the trees alone, fine, let's do it. The time for talking about all this stuff is over. So preschool, Mayor, you've been advocating that on your days in the school committee till now. So these are all great categories. I just don't know how it's going to be implemented. And just to throw out these figures of, it's just raising a lot of expectations. So I'll listen to other comments, but maybe it's best that we have a discussion among, well, we can't, a cup of coffee or something, among 1 or 2 councils, but just to see how this is going to be implemented, I guess. And, the city manager certainly has to be the one that brings in the appropriation, but, if this is what it takes to have several meetings and with the manager to come up with these things, then, I got a wish list too. So I think every councilor here has one too. So let's bring it on and bring it all out to the open. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Carlo.
We initially went in to talk about affordable housing only. And we talked, Councilor Zondervan and I know other people, we talked about increasing affordable housing. And as we talked, both Councilor Zondervan and I said there are other issues that are important, and we said each person has their own interested area. However, pre-K and the tree canopy are critical for the future of the city, and there is great interest in helping Central Square and getting the arts more highly funded. And the conclusion was, instead of focusing only on housing and leaving out the other areas which are predominantly the discussion in this chamber, that we would ask to double all these things. Now, some of them have hardly any funding, as Councilor Mallon mentioned, on the Cultural Arts District, so obviously that would be different. Presently, building housing is about $13.5 million a year, actual building, new housing. And so this shows approximately doubling that. And we said $3 million is probably not enough for the others. And we went over it, and we said each individual person will come forward, just like Councilor Toomey has said. But it, once again, is a significant step forward. Is it enough? Of course not. Do I believe it should be $20 million a year? Absolutely. Do I think we can afford that? We're the wealthiest city in the state. We can afford much more than anybody else. But this was a moderate conclusion that we came to, and we're hoping you support. And once again, I have no problem with the new order, but I think it should specify where that money's coming from, since that's what we said, this money's coming to us.
So I have 2 thoughts. One is a little birdie told me that the manager might still be in the building. I don't know if we're all in our best state of mind to continue this conversation that way. The other possibility, because rather than all 9 of us going to have individual conversations with the manager about things that we want and everything else, we could refer this, add the amendment, which I would be in favor of, refer it to the Finance Committee after, this isn't going to happen in the budget this year. After, we could do it before or after the budget hearings in May, have a Finance Committee meeting, which we are all a part of, with the manager, and we can actually have this conversation as a group rather than individually with him. It's an idea.
I just wanted to add what we wrote, the amount of money will be added. What the numbers I approximately said, there will be additions in this year based on the projection that you see before us.
So, I think the manager has probably heard
enough
this loud and clear. I know he's working hard on this. He may not have all the I's dotted to come back with a report on the $20 million that we asked for last year, but I trust that what he told me is the truth, and that he is trying to get there through, it may not be $20 million straight from free cash, it may be from other revenue streams. Quite honestly, I just want to get there. I want $20 million more for affordable housing every year. If he gets there from Airbnb and marijuana and whatever, I don't really care. If he gets there from free cash, I don't care. I want the money. So, but I think he is
follow up on your
working on that. So,
point.
Councilor Simmons, go ahead.
If this could, pass as amended, and if the council to be that there be a meeting to discuss with the city manager, in a open session, the nuances of that, that's fine. But what I think is important is because, and I agree with Councilor Carlone, this is something he said out of his own mouth. I know we need more money, and I agree with you on that. And so I wanted to stick behind our first, second, maybe third vote. I know that Councilor Siddiqui and I brought it in together, the $20 million. I know that this council voted it, maybe it was you and the other, in another iteration brought it in. And so let's keep the integrity of what the council has said. And then I hope my colleagues will be willing to sit down and we will tease this out. But I think it's important that the amendment is there and then the order go forward to wherever the council would like it to be vetted.
So the beauty of what we do here is that we get to vote on things, and it doesn't always have to be 9-0. So I'm going to go to the vice mayor, but we also have Councilor Zondervan's initial amendment just to add the word cash. We have this other amendment from Councilor Simmons. We can exercise our democratic process and vote on it and see where it lands. Vice Mayor.
Well, I liked your idea of having a finance committee hearing to discuss this, because it does seem a little bit like that's the purpose of the finance committee. And that's the appropriate place to have the staff talk about it. So I would offer to include in this, I think we should pass this order, but I think it should include and let's refer it to the finance committee, so that is part of the thing, and that can happen after the budget or whenever we have time to do that.
Okay. So I'm going to take the First Amendment, not the First Amendment, capital, Councilor Zondervan's First Amendment, that we add the word cash after the word free in the fourth whereas. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The Second Amendment of Councilor Simmons, that we add an order that reads that at least $20 million of this annual total be appropriated for affordable housing development as required by the April 23rd, 2018 policy order that called for an additional $20 million per year for this purpose over the next 5 years, which was adopted by the City Council, and be it further. On that amendment, all those in favor say aye.
Mayor, just point of information.
Councilor Toomey.
This amendment, that 20 million isn't on top of the 30 million, so it's now 50 million. I just want to.
It's not. It's to make sure of that 30 million, 20 goes to affordable.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
I just, when reading this, it says as required. Technically, it would be as requested. I mean, we can't require anything.
Yeah,
that's
probably accurate.
Unfortunately.
Okay. So, first we will take up to change required to requested. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Now on the amendment, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We now have an amendment by Vice Mayor Devereaux to refer this to the...
Did we do the order as amended?
We did. The last amendment was Councilor Simmons' amendment with the word required changed to requested. So now we have another amendment by the Vice Mayor to refer this to the Finance Committee for a hearing. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. On the order as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. All right. We now move to committee reports. Pleasure of the council. The question comes on accepting report and placing on file. All those in favor say aye. And those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Roundtable minutes, there are none. Oh, there are. It's not in my book. Okay. I don't have them. Roundtable minutes, pleasure of the council. For the March 13th. Okay. We already accepted them. Any discussion? None. We've already accepted them at the beginning of the meeting. We now move to communication and reports from city officers. There is one. Pleasure of the council. On placing on file, all those in favor.
One sec. I wasn't
Vice
sure
Mayor.
if Councillor Mallon won. I would just wanted to
Vice
echo or reiterate that, well, thanks for doing such thorough minutes of these meetings. I noticed that once again, the idea of allowing acoustic music without having to go through getting a one-day license and jump through a bunch of hoops came up, and I wanted to say that I was at a place in Inman Square yesterday for an event where the proprietor actually mentioned, gee, it would sure be nice to be able to do that. And I was like, well, we're trying. And he was like, really? Oh, that's great. So
Maybe it's just getting late, but didn't we do that? Didn't you and I put in that policy order last term? Okay, and it just
and
still hasn't
well,
happened.
actually, in this, it says the license commissioner did say that we would have an answer on that soon, and I just am putting in a plug for it being a favorable answer.
Okay, great. On placing on file, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Any late orders and late resolutions, Madam Clerk? One late resolution.
We have a resolution on the death of Elizabeth St. John Meyer Dunn, submitted by Councilor Simmons.
Councilor Simmons, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Many of you may not have known Betsy Dunn. I didn't know her name was as full as it is. She was an extraordinary woman who lived in Cambridge for a number of years, went to school here, had a long and extraordinary life in that she worked very diligently on and for the rights of women, particularly around women and voting, women and empowerment. She in the last maybe 10, 20 years, she became less active, but she used to be active in the Cambridge Civic Association, the League of Women Voters. She was an extraordinary woman in her own right, and she just recently passed at her home amongst family and friends. And I just thought it'd be fitting that the City Council acknowledge Miss Betsy Dunn and all the extraordinary work she did.
Thank you. On adoption, making unanimous upon adoption, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Any announcements?
Mr. Mayor?
Councilor Toomey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just want to remind the residents that a week from today starts street cleaning. Again, in the city of Cambridge, just remind everybody to look at their schedule to make sure you're going to be hearing the DPW employee riding around saying, move your car, you'll be ticketed and towed. So a week from today, April 1st, starts that, and yard waste pickup also starts at the beginning of the month, too.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other further announcements? Councilor Siddiqui?
I'll just add that there is a way to, for everyone watching, there is a way to receive messages via email or text to get reminders that your street is going to be cleaned. And we should give some. I got an email to register for street cleaning reminders, so it's very helpful if you obviously have access to a phone or computer.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. Councillor Kelly.
A reminder that the North Cambridge Family Opera is this Saturday and Sunday in the afternoon and evening, and the following Saturday, Sunday in the afternoon and evening. And I am the leader of the resistance of all things. It's my first operatic solo. Just 2 lines, but well worth the effort.
Mr. Mayor?
Vice Mayor.
We had a policy order that we didn't pull, that the city will be recognizing Earth Hour on Saturday night between 8:30 and 9:30 p.m. People all over the world will be turning off their lights in a sort of show of solidarity. It's an international event sponsored by the World Wildlife Fund, so we're hoping that the non-essential lights in City Hall and people's homes will be turned off. Thanks.
Thank you. Anything further? On a motion by Councillor Toomey to adjourn, all those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it.